Hello, friends. Welcome to another edition of Friday Night Fanfiction. I'm your host, Shintaika Kuro. You could be anywhere in the world right now, but I'm glad you're here with me. So, how is everybody tonight? It's Friday night, and the time is right. Alrighty. I see Lewis in the chat. What's going on, my man? Glad you could make it. If you're in the chat, just say hello. All right, a few new little extra additions. If you can't tell already, I have a new little webcam. The only reason I haven't used a webcam up until now is because I've only got like two USB ports on my computer. So one is connected to my one I use for my microphone, and the other for my capture device. So I considered doing a face cam, but I decided to do something a little bit different. So I'm switching to the Devi cam, and this is not a static image. See, this is actually a camera. Yep, that's actually him. What you're seeing on screen is my custom built is my Devastator. It's actually considered a knockoff Devastator. I've actually wanted a Devastator since I was a little kid. So a couple of years, like a while back, I came into some extra money and I decided to buy one. I considered buying the Walmart reissue of the G1, but there was two problems. It was too small and it was too expensive, like $70. So I started looking into like KOs or Chinese knockoffs. I had one that cost me like $30, but I decided to give that one to my nephew after I found this beautiful summer bitch. This is the NKB Gravity build, the NBK Gravity Builder. So it's technically is and it isn't Devastator. So as you can see, it is highly detailed. It is an incredible piece. It is an incredible model, and it's one of my favorites. I have another combiner, Combiner Wars Bruticus, but he's somewhere in the room. I can't really go get him right now. So I just figured you guys deserve to look at something, and we're gonna just you can look at my beautiful Debbie. Oh, forgot one more thing. There we go. There we go. Yep. I actually didn't find out about this little feature of his light up eyes until like 3 months after I bought him. I had to actually look it up on YouTube on I was looking about how to transform him into from the Constructicons into Devastator, and I saw some guy say in the comments like, there's a switch behind his head that makes his eyes light up, and like, you bullshitting. So I did. I checked it out, and sure enough, light up eyes. All right. I'm just gonna be shooting the shit for a while until we get some more people. Lewis, I see you in the Luis. You're in the chat. I'm sorry if I've been calling you Luis. I'm sorry, but if you're in the chat, say what's up, man. Glad you could be here. You were here during the my protest stream, and I thank you for the support. I'm just gonna wait for a little bit until we get some more people in here. I had to let my link filter around a little bit. As for what's going on with me, nothing much. I want to retract the statement I made on my protest stream about the 24/7 belt. There you are, Luis. How's it going, man? Great that you could be here. I want to retract my statement I made about the 24/7 belt. It has really grown on me, and part of that mostly is due to R-Truth. He has really made that belt his own. He he was made for the 24/7 belt, especially on Twitter. And I really enjoyed watching him defend that belt and just try to avoid people trying to pin him and all kind of stuff. It's just a fun belt. I can't say it's the hardcore title because they can't do hardcore anymore. Mostly because hardcore wrestling just isn't in vogue right now, and there's really no one in the back who can wrestle the hardcore style and who want to wrestle the hardcore style. But yeah. when I retract it, I actually started the 24/7 belt is actually growing on me. Next up, today was a very special day for the family. My nephew Quentin is has graduated from 5th grade, so soon he will be entering middle school. Yay! He was looking very dapper in his banquet outfit. He looked very clean, like his uncle. Yes. I was planning on doing a Smash tournament this Sunday, but unfortunately, my nephews wanted to come over, and I can't really do that when they're over here because they're gonna want to do some stuff, and they'll be hogging the Switch all the time, so I wouldn't have time or the energy to really make one. Plus, they'll be coming in here like every so often, just holding up the tournament and what have you. So there's that. So anyway, I'm gonna wait until like 8:10 until to start the fanfic. So I'm just gonna shoot the shit for a little bit and just interact with you guys. Also, if you notice at the bottom of the screen, we have a nice little goal donation bar for people who want to donate a little money to get Debbie some food because he is a very big boy and he needs a lot of food. So there's that. Alrighty, cut that down. Okay. Had to getting some water. Oh, it's also Memorial Day weekend, so if you guys got any plans, we're planning on barbecuing a whole chicken for Memorial Day. My dad's barbecuing, so I'll have to do some yard work to get the yard cleaned up, so he doesn't have to worry about starting fires and stuff. My dad's actually pretty good on the pit, where we're native Texans, so of course we're good on the pit. You guys need to have barbecue. If you haven't had barbecue, you haven't lived yet. Texas barbecue. It's good. It's good. Just makes me hungry for some. Also, I'm kind of mad at my sister because she's making her famous nachos and I can't have any because she lives over there and I live over here and she doesn't want to send me any. It's just being stingy. All right. There's some water in me. Also, quick note of warning: if there is any donations or new subscribers, I won't be able to see them until after I finish the chapter because I won't be able to read or hear anything because of the way my mic is set up. I don't have any means of hearing anything on my channel, so I can't really hear anything right now. The only way I can hear something is to put my headphones on, but I can't really hear my voice when I put those headphones on. They're very powerful noise cancelers. Oh, I forgot to bring in my girl Pugsley. Paste. Yes. Also, thank you to Pugsley. She was very kind enough to She was very kind enough to send me some money this week so I can afford some pizza, and I actually bought a lot of pizza thanks to her. I got it from from Patron's Pizza. Yeah, if you've never heard of Patron's Pizza, it's okay. It's a Texas-based pizza company. They have really good pizza at really good prices. The only thing is they don't deliver. So I got like a large and an extra large pizza and some queso sticks, which are just cheese sticks, and a 2-liter bottle of root beer for like $16. And that's a deal whatever you say. So that's all good. Alrighty then. Gonna wait one more minute. Let me see here. I'm just making sure everything's okay. Making sure everything's running okay. Alrighty then. That out of the way. My voice is hydrated. And so let's get what you've all come here for. Some delicious fan fiction. And we will be continuing, if you can't tell by the title and the pic on the screen, we'll be continuing with our Star Trek Doctor Who crossover, a madman, a captain and a madman. Quick recap for those of you who were not here last week. Captain and the Madman is a crossover between the 11th Doctor, Matt Smith, and primarily TNG Star Trek. There will be other generations in this one too, but this is just primarily TNG. Story so far: the Doctor, in preparation for his final rendezvous with death at Lake Silencio in Utah, finds himself in the universe of the Star Trek universe. Unfortunately, the TARDIS shuts down and he is unable to fly anywhere. And so he he is picked up by none other than Captain Jean-Luc Picard, captain of the Enterprise D. They initially are wary of him because this takes place shortly after their last encounter with a supposed time traveler, Mr. Rasmussen, and are all on their way to the Alcheron system to deal with their son going rogue. The Doctor uses his expertise to help to save the planet, as well as the crew of the ship, and they use all their resources to help him fix the TARDIS. Unfortunately, Starfleet Command, hearing about Captain Picard's report on this mysterious Doctor and his TARDIS, decide that he could be considered a threat, and they want him to be detained by Starfleet so they can interrogate and or dissect him. Yep, so Captain Picard is once again forced to do something that goes against his moral character. What's Captain Picard going to do? What's the Doctor going to do? Will he be able to fix his TARDIS in time? Well, let's find out together as we re-enter the world of a Captain and a Madman by Raziel, Lord of Squirrels. Published in May 23rd, 2013. Chapter 6. 36 hours later. So let me see if I could get this straight, LaForge said, arms crossed over his chest as he eyed the nearly finished device the Doctor was fussing over. The holodeck was bare at the moment, except for a single workbench in the center of the room. Over the past day and a half, various tools and devices, ranging from handheld to massive structures, had filled the chamber, offering a variety of functions, some obvious to the Enterprise chief engineer, and some quite obscure. At the end of all the work, though, there was this device. The bottom segment looked as if any piece of Starfleet tech. Burnished gray beryllium alloy at the circular base, with a glossy black control panel on one side. The interior was a mess of circuits and even some old-fashioned wiring, a jury-rigged amalgamation of several generations' worth of human and Federation technology. The truly alien component was locked into the base. What had once been a hunk of dilithium crystal had been since metamorphized due to the Dr. Crusher's guiding treatments of it. Instead of a smooth, shimmering piece of crystal, it was misshapen. A pale white and orange, covered in tiny little pockmarks throughout its surface. To LaForge's visor, the thing looked quite literally like nothing he'd ever seen. Your TARDIS doesn't work because it can't draw on our energy from our universe, LaForge started slowly, as if fully expecting to be corrected. And the reason it can't do that is the materials it's constructed from originate from your own universe, and has a quantum signature that leaves it fundamentally incompatible with this time vortex. So good so far, the Doctor chirped distractedly. So this coral-looking stuff, his head tilted as he considered it. Because it's made of raw materials from our universe, it'll draw the necessary power and let your TARDIS do whatever it is that your TARDIS does. In theory, the Doctor chirped. Truth be told, never attempted it before, never had the chance. Don't know if anyone has. Without your replicators, your dilithium crystals, I wouldn't have been able to jury something to draw on its own supply of fuel. And let me tell you, the last thing I want to do is go giving it my life force again. Blasé as I acted the first time is it's absurdly risky to be tossed around. Now, because of a TARDIS has grown from a species of pseudo-coral, I had to find perhaps a planet with a similar supply, but lacking that, I decided I would be close enough to use a fifth-dimensional crystal lattice and make some very, very minor tweaks to its molecular makeup. Aren't you worried that you're revealing the deep, dark secrets of time travel to me? LaForge asked, slowly brow lifting. Well, let me put it this way, the Doctor chirped, clasping LaForge's shoulder with one hand and giving him a winning smile. If you can deduce the complexities and inner workings of a TARDIS from development to operation based entirely on the words, she's grown from some sort of coral, then you most absolutely deserve a TARDIS. But I'm not necessarily holding my breath. In all honesty, there are quicker, easier, if what's somewhat less effective, less accurate, and far more riskier means to achieve time travel. According to your historical database, your Federation has even figured out a few. We don't monopolize the concept, we just happen to find the most stylish way of going about it. LaForge couldn't help but grin at that. But before he could continue his conversation, a repressed yawn pushed from him, his jaws straining and shifting as he tried desperately not to give in and let it out. Even though he was certain he repressed it completely, the doctor didn't even have to look at him to notice, and the Time Lord's tongue tisked lightly. Oh, go to sleep already, he scowled, grinning. He scolded, grinning. You've been up for over 30 hours, which is impressive for a human. But I promise I won't leave without saying goodbye first. All that's really left is some fine-tuning and tests before I plug this lovely thing in. So go, rest. LaForge started to protest, but was cut off by another yawn. And so he had little choice but to surrender, laughing softly as he picked up his pad. All right, I'll go lie down for a few hours. But you better not do anything really, really exciting without me, all right? I shall do my very, very best, the doctor replied, hunched over the device. But such excitements have a habit of finding me. I can make no promises. We'll see. Chuckling, LaForge rubbed his jaw, starting to move towards the exit. Good night, Doc. Once the holodeck doors shut behind LaForge, the doctor took a deep breath, eyes narrowing. He'd actually been waiting for the chief engineer to depart for some time, though it wasn't because he didn't enjoy the man's company. He had a sharp mind, incredibly so, and the Time Lord had actually been careful not to be too liberal with the flow of information. But something that has been bothering him in the back of his mind for some time, and he wanted some privacy to confirm it. Computer, he called out. Create a data display on the far right wall, and access the historical data I was reading earlier. Change search parameters into between mid-20th and mid-21st century. Chronological order, usual rate. The wall of the holodeck shimmered, a massive monitor appearing. A moment later, a series of news clippings, historical files, and other bits of information began fitting through the screen at a quick pace. Though nowhere near the rate a certain android could absorb information, it still passed by far quicker than any normal human could track. Dozens of incident reports and articles passing within minutes. At first, the doctor only paid it a brief attention, keeping an eye on them as he continued to tinker with his newest toy. But as time passed, his work began to slow, and then stop, until his full attention was locked on the display. With every minute that passed, his expression grew more grim, his eyes more troubled. His fingers began to tighten around the edges of the workbench, and his lips pursed, weight shifting recklessly from one foot to another. He was feeling trapped, cramped. He needed to get out of this room, some air. Here on a starship, wanting some fresh air. No, not that. He wanted to be closer to the stars. As it turns out, the place that had to find such a view was a lounge the computer called 10 Forward. The doctor found it quickly enough. The single security officer who stood guard over the holodeck escorted him there before leaving him to go to the bar. Appreciative of the privacy, the doctor was quick to claim a seat closest to the vast windows, hoping that maybe if he let himself get lost in the view, he could get his mind off the troubling things that he dug up. But that didn't last. He brought a pad with him containing the same information he had been reading earlier, and as much as he wanted to drink in the starscape, his gaze gradually dropped to the electronic device, until he had just as immersed in it as he had been on the holodeck. So focused was he that he lost track of the passage of time. Yet another first. Hello there. It wasn't until the voice sounded that the doctor realized that someone had approached his table. Glancing up, startled, the Time Lord frowned a bit to see the dark-skinned woman dressed in blue, sweeping robes, and a truly enviable hat to boot. Clearing his throat, he licked his lips and glanced around the room briefly, as if hoping she was maybe talking to someone else. No such luck. The lounge was almost deserted. Hello, the Time Lord wanted to say he was busy, wanting to ask her to leave, but, well, he was the guest. I'm the doctor. So I've heard, the woman replied. Pleased to meet you. I'm Guinan. Guinan, the doctor echoed, then frowned. You're not on the crew roster. What is it that you do here? Well, I guess you could say I'm the hostess, she replied, hands vanishing into the voluminous sleeves of her robe as she sat across from him, leaning forward and lowering her voice to a constipatingly low murmur. I serve drinks, I tend bar, and I listen. And I have to say, in all the time I've done it, I don't think I've ever seen someone with so much to hear that I've heard so by heard so my bleh. I don't think I've ever seen someone with so much to hear that's been heard by so few. I think maybe you ought to you had some things you want to get off your chest. Get some things off my chest, you say, the Time Lord muttered, returning his attention poignantly to the pad with a snort. Do you have a few 100 years? I think I could spare the time, she replied, deadpanned. The doctor's eyes flickered upward at that, startled, and then he narrowed it just a little, as if he was staring past her, through her, into something that only he could see. That she wasn't human was only a mild surprise to him, and the fact that her race wasn't similar to him wasn't a surprise at all. What did catch his interest was that, for her, he felt something that he hadn't felt in countless years. Kinship. A corner of his mouth quirked upwards into a small, sad smile. Very old, very wise, very kind, and very lonely, she finished. The very same smile mirrored his own face. Somehow you seem familiar. The doctor's arms folded across his chest as he leaned back in his seat, considering her for a long moment before asking, I don't suppose you're a Time Lord that forgot to stare into the untempered schism. I'm afraid not, she replied. I don't suppose you're an Elulurian with a few redundant organs. He actually chuckled at that, for a moment a good, cleansing laugh under his breath. No, I doubt it. Though with alternate universes, who can say for sure? We could be fifth cousins, 30 times removed. Guinan smiled and gestured at the pad he held, brow furrowing in curiosity. Most people come here for the view. What is it that you hear for this has you so fascinated this past hour that your gaze hasn't wandered? Historical information, the doctor replied, passing the pad slightly, waving the pad slightly, and trying not to show that he was surprised at how much time had passed. On this United Federation of Planets, and on Earth's development between the 20th century and the current times. I had hoped I could isolate a point where you told me where your universe is differentiated from mine, but there's too many unexplained variables in this galaxy alone. For one thing, no sign of Centaurans, the Daleks, not even any mentions of the Silurians, and they were Earth's original occupants. Instead, there's a species I've never heard of hint of. Others that seem almost parodies of threats from my universe. Don't get me started on the Borg, for instance. Suggesting the differences happened long, long ago, Guinan replied. Untold eons. Yes, and once my TARDIS is operational, I tend to pop over there and see what's what, the doctor muttered. Until then, I've been restricting my attention to Earth herself, and I'm, if anything, all the more troubled. What have you found? My handiwork, he replied. Well, the other me. This universe is me. Guinan's brow arched. So this universe had a doctor, huh? Strange to no records or stories that have made it on the public consciousness. Actually, the Time Lord replied, a bit grimly, I think the term had is right. This universe had a doctor. I see some evidence of interventions, disasters averted. Some of them I remember quite clearly from my universe. Others that just seem like something I would have done. But too few of them. At a certain point in my own timeline, one I have yet to pinpoint, there's nothing. It's difficult to tell when, of course, time was being rewritten again and again, but at some time in my past, this doctor seemed to simply vanish. Perhaps he died. Perhaps he decided to stop interfering with mankind's affairs, but for whatever reason, the Earth was bereft of a doctor. And yet, you're almost disappointed to see humanity's done so well for itself without him, Guinan finished. Without you. Not disappointed. I'm not quite that monstrous, the doctor replied quite dryly, but shrugged, leaning back, ruffling his hair, and leaning forward again, elbows resting on the table as his other hand gestured emphatically. But it does make me wonder if at some point in all my cavorting around trying to keep the Earth from being blown to dust, held the planet back in a sense. kept it from developing as it should have, standing on its own 2 feet. This Third World War I read about was terrible, terrible tragedy, something I probably would have prevented in its entirety had I been there. Aren't you just a little full of yourself? Guinan interjected softly. The doctor's eyebrows cocked, a wan smile crossing his face. Am I? Guinan considered that, then shook her head, teeth flashing into a smile. On second thought, maybe not. Yes, well, what if I succeeded in stopping the Third War? The doctor threw his hands up. There possibly wouldn't have been the first warp flight, no first contact, no federation. Humanity would have been continued to plod along in a state of tension and infighting, and I probably would have ended up having to save it from the Romulans next, and then the Klingons, the Borg. Countless threats, countless invasions I would have done everything to prevent, and in doing so denied humanity the opportunity to learn from each experience, from each loss, and grow as a people. This Federation is the very epitome of what I dreamed humanity would become, a dream they often seem so just short of reaching. Perhaps because of me. Perhaps, Gaiden replied agreeably, her eyes narrowing a little. So what keeps you from giving them a chance? Honestly, the Time Lord frowned pensively. Fear of failure. Yours or theirs? Aren't they one and the same? The doctor's chuckle was very quiet, very tired. Mine as a result of theirs. What happens if I give them free rein, count on them to save themselves, and they can't? What if the next big threat I refuse to interfere with wipes them all out? What if yet another race, because of me, is scattered to oblivion? Another? Guinan echoed. The doctor fell silent, head bowing, jaw tight. It was the same wall that he erected when Counselor Troyd had pushed him to that painful spot. An evasion. The Betazoid had changed topics, not wanting to alienate him. The Elulurian simply watched him, for a long moment, head tilted as if hearing something without overt sound. And then, after a long stretch of a few minutes, Guinan spoke again, her voice soft, gentle. Captain Picard and I have been friends for quite some time. We confide in each other. A few years ago, he spoke to me of a being the Enterprise encountered, living in a destroyed colony. It looked human at first, but it proved to be a creature of incredible power, great wisdom, and it was a being that destroyed an entire race in a moment of anger, an act for which it was wrought with guilt and regret. Somehow, when I look at you, I remember that story. I don't see why. My crime is far worse, the doctor replied, snorting, his eyes dark, only half aware of what he was saying. Lashed out in anger. Anyone can do that. Dishes break, furniture breaks, sometimes people. But in the heat, or it's always in the heat of the moment. There's no such thing as rage. There's no such rage to excuse what I did. No heat. I knew exactly what I was doing when I did it. I was precise, calculating, and in no way affected by anger or disgust, though I well should have been. Worse, by far, was that it wasn't just some race, some strangers on a distant planet far removed from my home. It was my race, my people, my home. It takes something pretty serious to feel that way about your own people, Guinan replied mildly. Something worse to know that you should be feeling it, even if you don't. Yes, well, the doctor hesitated for a moment, but just a moment. One last niggling barrier to keep his secret safe, until it gave way, and he let that darkness pour out. They left me little choice, you see. A loathsome plan made by the Council in hopes of ending the great Time War in victory. Only it would have been a victory for us, for our race. Everyone else, every enemy, civilization, everything in the universe would have been eradicated to achieve this ultimate victory. And the gain for us, a life of incorporeal existence as echoes, ghosts, remnants of what we once were. The final sanction, he called it. Such a soft, clean name for something drenched in so much blood. So I weighed the options. I looked at the Daleks, beings of pure genocidal evil, dedicated to the elimination of any and all life forms not itself Dalek. Then I looked at my own kind and could not for the life of me see the difference anymore. It was then that I acted. It was then I killed them all. The Daleks, the Time Lords, they all burned together, bound at the end as brothers by their wretched aims. So much destruction, so much death. All because I tried to do the right thing. The doctor's jaw clenched. Because I thought I was righteous. I wondered, did that make me any more different than the rest of them? His thoughts were disturbed by the oddest thing. Physical contact. Eyes focusing, he saw Guinan's hand resting on his. Just the tips of her fingers, pressed lightly against the back of his hand. But something about the gesture was eminently comforting. When he met her gaze, he saw no disgust, no judgment, just quiet acceptance. And it nearly broke his hearts. Who can say for sure? Guinan replied, giving a casual shrug. All I know is you did what you could, what you had to do. Who's to say humans wouldn't have died out if our doctor hadn't been there to at least some of the time? Who's to guess some species-ending disaster wouldn't have been bearable for them? And which wouldn't? No matter what happened, no matter the cost, you still did everything you could to protect them. You should remember that, because sooner or later you're going to come face to face with exactly what you never wanted to become. Oh, the doctor's brow quirked as he tried to snort. What's that? The man who stopped trying. The doctor actually was stunned by that, his gaze falling away from the bartender, flicking away as he thought to himself, before sighing, climbing to his feet, and for the first time in hours allowing himself to wince at the aches of his bruised limbs. Thank you for listening, Guinan, but I need to get back to work. Of course. Thank you for visiting, Guinan replied, remaining seated as he began to move away. But then she spoke again, stopping him in his tracks. Doctor, can I ask you one last question? Turning to the Elulurian, the Time Lord nodded, face unreadable. Anything. Well, your actions destroyed your people to save others. You must have been very lonely for a very long time afterwards, and I don't think part of you regrets it. So if you went back for a moment, faced that same decision, knowing all that you know, feeling as you do, would you kill them all again? The doctor's lips spread into another sad smile, and as he turned to leave once more, he called back over his shoulder. In a heartbeat. So you spoke with him, then? Guinan smiled a little at the sound of Picard's voice. She knew he was keeping tabs on the Time Lord's movements, just as she knew he was coming down here soon after learning of the man's visit to 10 Forward. Although Counselor Troy was generally the one Picard turned to for counsel, and for good reason. He certainly learned to accept Guinan's particular perceptions, and when she turned to glance at him, she realized he probably needed some advice himself. I know what you're going to ask me, Guinan said, sighing softly as she got to her feet. Is he dangerous? Yes, more than you can imagine. Is he a threat to you or this crew? No. In fact, from the guilt that's pulling at your brow right now, it looks like we are more of a threat to him than he is to us right now. Care to fill me in? Picard's mouth thinned a little, but he told her about the communique from Starfleet, the confidential orders, everything. I won't stand it. I won't let it stand, Picard murmured as the story concluded, his head shaking. I'll fight this Guinan. I won't let them simply abduct him. You really shouldn't bother. Picard's head snapped at those words, eyes widening to nothing short of shock. Beg pardon? You shouldn't bother, Guinan replied, waving a hand as she moved to collect a pair of discarded glasses. It's a waste of time, Captain, looking out for an alien with an odd box by complaining to people who really wouldn't care. I would make them care, Picard snapped. I'm surprised at you, Guinan. I should file a protest, follow the Intrepid back to Earth, take this all the way to the Federation Council if need be, beat down every door, and shake every stoogey, cell desk-bound bureaucrat of an admiral by the lapels until I've made them see what they're doing is fundamentally wrong. You could, but it wouldn't matter, she continued. By the time your protests are borne fruit, by the time the Federation Council ruled in your favor, the Doctor will be lost, swallowed up by less than acknowledged elements of Starfleet. You would hear 100 heartfelt apologies, 1,000 expressions of guilt and regret for this misunderstanding, this tragedy. But he'll be gone, and you'll never be able to find him. At least not until they're done with him and tossed him away what's left. They would have what they came for, and no one would be able to take the blame for it. Picard, who had been shaking his head through most of her speech, found her denials fading with each word that sunk deeper and deeper into his mind. His expression, which had begun so stony and determined, grew more troubled. So with each passing moment, by the time he had finished, his head was bowed, his face full of equal parts anger and dejection. So, Guinan continued, moving back to the bar, as much as you want to raise your protests, file your appeals, work through the proper channels with the proper forms, it's all just going to be a pointless waste of time. So as I said, you really shouldn't bother. Something about her tone tugged at his instincts, and when Picard glanced up, he saw Guinan was watching him quietly. You're right, Picard said, and his confusion was replaced by a spark of understanding. The proper channels. All of that would be a waste of time. Wouldn't accomplish anything at all. The Jean-Luc Picard I know would never waste his time on something he knew would never work, Guinan said softly, even if his instincts as an officer told him there was only legitimate path available to him. And the Federation I first encountered many, many years ago would have never met refugees with confinement and interrogation. Thank you, Guinan. Picard nodded slowly, tugging at his uniform top, eyes glittering with half-formed ideas. You gave me a lot to think about. Hey, Guinan shrugged, leaning idly against the bar as she watched the captain stride out, that small, enigmatic smile of hers tugging at her lips. I'm just trying to save you some time. And end of chapter 6. Woo! Hello, Pugsley. Glad you could join us. So, the Doctor had an encounter with Guinan. Actually, I was looking forward to this. 2 ancient beings filled with secrets and from ancient races long more advanced than humanity meet for the first time. It's some good stuff. It's some good reading. So the captain decides that there's no point in going through official channels. So what's our dear Captain Jean-Luc Picard going to do to save the life of the man he was come to save his life of his crew? Let's find out, shall we? All right, here we go. Chapter 7. Picard remained on the bridge for the next handful of hours, trying to focus on reports, crew evaluations, a handful of routine communiques from Starfleet. But in truth, he was waiting. Waiting for the call that would trigger the next phase in his duty. That call came a few hours after Data returned to the bridge from his work on the TARDIS itself. And when he did, Picard sat ramrod straight in his chair. LaForge to bridge, the chief engineer's ever-jubilant tones came through from the main engineering, where he'd been running diagnostics ever since their guests continued to toil on the holodeck. The doctor reports he's finished constructing the module. He'd like to install it in the ship as soon as possible. Very well, Picard replied, nodding. Have the security detail escort the doctor back to his quarters, Mr. LaForge, and place his device in a storage case. There was a pause before LaForge asked, Sir? You heard me, Lieutenant, Picard said firmly. Do not say anything to alarm him, just bring him back to his quarters. Make sure you cut off his cabin from the main computer internal sensors. We cannot allow him to access our systems again. Aye, sir. There was more than a little confusion in LaForge's voice, but it was tempered by resignation. Picard out. Captain, Riker said, eyes narrowing. What's going on? Turning his attention back to the report on the display of the arm of his chair, Picard's brows lifted, his tone casual. Well, Starfleet has instructed us to take the doctor prisoner and deliver him and his vessel to the Intrepid. Should be arriving in a few more hours, at which point we are to hand both of them over so they can return with him to Starfleet Command. The entire bridge crew seemed to freeze at that. Looks ranging from between shock, incredulity, and even anger crossed their faces, of everyone except for Data. Sir, with all due respect, Riker protested, not even trying to hide his own anger. That's against a charter. We should appeal the orders. We have our orders, Commander, Picard replied slowly, cutting short any argument. We'll follow them as our conscience dictates. Riker nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of confusion and irritation, mouth twisting. Aye, sir. Lieutenant Worf, Picard continued calmly, settling in his command chair. Given Starfleet obviously considers this visitor a serious threat to our security, we can only assume the objects he's designed are similarly dangerous. He claims it will render the TARDIS operational, but it could serve a far more nefarious purpose. In the interest of ship security, I think it would be best if we move the device from the holodeck to somewhere nearer and a quick evacuation point, should it prove dangerous. Such as Shuttle Bay 2. Shuttle Bay 2? But, sir. Worf paused for a moment, brows furrowed, and then understanding started to bloom across the bridge crew. Riker shifting restlessly in his seat as the Klingon security officer continued solemnly. Aye, sir. I will have the dangerous contraband moved to the shuttle bay. Given the intruder's vessel is also within Shuttle Bay 2, we will be able to eject both into space if it becomes necessary. Just what I was thinking, Mr. Worf, Picard replied, nodding, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Make it show. For the security of the safety detail, move them out of the shuttle bay. Have them guard the access points. Send a message to the Intrepid informing them that we've secured their prisoner and await their arrival. Mr. Data, are you confident that you've completed the modifications to the Doctor's TARDIS? Data turned around in his chair to face the captain, nodding. Yes, sir. The Doctor seemed confident that the vessel will be prepared for his module. Excellent, the Picard drawled as he climbed to his feet again, tugging in his uniform. Admiral Ross will be pleased, Commander Riker. You have the bridge. But in case I am not at hand to take the Admiral's next communique, please pass this message along for me. Captain, the Doctor greeted, lounging in back of one of the chairs. A bit unusual, forcing me back into these quarters. And you've come armed, no less. Should I be worried? Stepping inside, Picard quickly instructed the pair of security officers to remain outside. He was indeed armed, a phaser clipped to his belt. Hands folded behind his back, he considered his guests for a moment, drawing a deep breath as he prepared for what was to come. As requested, LaForge had completely isolated the ship's computer systems from the Doctor's quarters, limiting computer access, but also shutting off the room's internal sensors in the process. Doctor, Picard began solemnly, his face heavily lined as he took a seat next to the offered chair. I have been ordered to deliver you to one of another vessel of ours, and to deny you access to your own. Starfleet Command wishes to speak with you and to examine your TARDIS in greater detail. They are concerned your knowledge and your technologies could prove a threat to the Federation and her allies, particularly if either were to come into possession of one of our enemies. I would like you to know that I will do all within my power to fight these orders, he continued slowly. To protest to Starfleet Command, but the Intrepid's impending arrival has greatly restricted my options. My concern is that the faction we're dealing with shall have no such scruples about disappearing with you once you are secured, in which case no lawful protest could be made to the Federation Council with help. In addition, if I can arrange for you to leave openly, disobeying my orders, my internal sensor logs will implicate my crew, which will be considered as an act of treason. That is a risk I cannot take. The Time Lord considered the words for a long moment, the friendly glimmer in his eyes fading, replaced with chill venom. Climbing to his feet, the Doctor advanced just a couple of steps, arms folded across his chest, head tilted. Captain, the Doctor said after a moment, his tone without the vibrancy of color. I understand your position and appreciate you coming to me, but in light of your rather startling honesty, I feel terribly guilty if I didn't warn you that I will do everything in my not inconsiderable power to escape. From this ship, from the one that's coming, or from Earth if need be. I won't go quietly with your people. When Picard turned to face him, his face was studiously blank, the very picture of innocence. Oh, I'm counting on it. The Time Lord actually looked surprised at that, and then his lips quirked up into a smile. I see. Try and remain comfortable, Picard said casually. The Intrepid will be arriving in 4 hours to collect you. Your TARDIS has been returned to the shuttle bay, as we cannot confirm it does not pose a threat to this vessel. As long as someone reacts quickly enough, we will depressurize the bay and vent it out into space. I stand warned, Captain, the doctor replied solemnly. I will think most wistfully of my lost TARDIS tucked away in that shuttle bay on deck, 12? Deck 11. Your illicitly constructed device is there as well, for security reasons. Naturally. Picard gave a short, curt nod. Of course, there are security personnel guarding every access point with orders to stun you should you attempt entry. For their sake, I cannot order them to override Starfleet instructions. And though you slipped out of here quite easily the first time, they'll be prepared for such tactics now, without some form of leverage, such as a hostage. It will be unlikely you'll be able to reach your vessel unchallenged. A hostage? The doctor's eyes narrowed a bit, flickering to the phaser in the captain's belt, but shook his head. No, I have this thing, you see, about guns. Commendable, Picard noted before continuing slowly. But it's either you pretend you'll shoot someone, or you'll have to shoot several people on your way to the shuttle bay. My way, you must agree, is the lesser of two regrettable evils. The doctor's mouth opened to reply, and then closed again. Settling back into his chair, he considered the point. The same mischievous glimmer starting to show itself more as he gave a single pensive grunt. Security to the bridge! The guest has taken the captain hostage and has escaped, I'm guessing, Riker interjected, seating at the center chair of the bridge, not even glancing up from the pad he was reading. We'll have someone down to get you out of his quarters. Riker out. Mr. Worf, send security teams to all decks. Apprehend the doctor and send out a distress call to the Intrepid for a good measure. That didn't take long, Worf muttered, even as he sent out security alerts and triggered the distress call, before turning his attention back to his diagnostic on his targeting scanners. Perhaps I should double the frequency of our training drills. Just outside Shuttle Bay 2, the security team poised at the entrance had their phasers lifted, bodies hunched but weren't firing. It's because the doctor was, at the moment, hiding behind Picard, arm wrapped around the older-looking man's throat, other hand pressed the tip of his own phaser square in the side of Captain Picard's head. He was trying to give a threatening glower, but given that he wasn't feeling threatening, all he could do is bare his teeth, scrunch his nose, and wiggle his ears like a cat trying to puff out its fur to look bigger. Drop your weapons, all of you! The doctor barked, trying his best to sound menacing and threatening as he kept the phaser pressed to the side of Picard's skull. Or I'll phaser his head off. Yeah, I'm a madman with a box capable of anything. Rawr! A little overdone, Doctor, Picard muttered quietly enough for the Time Lord to hear, his hands held up high as he raised his voice to address his security personnel. Do as he says. Drop your weapons. Step away from them. Glancing at each other, the security team set their weapons down and lifted their hands, palms outward, stepping away from the shuttle bay door as one. Scuttling forward, half guiding, half pushing his captive along with him, the doctor slipped into the shuttle bay and whirled around, keeping the doctor perpetually between him and the security men. Though they left their phasers on the deck, they slowly followed the Time Lord inside, presenting their hands, but all clearly looking like someone likes for some opening they could take advantage of. Any sudden movements, I make him dusty. Take you hours to sweep up all the Picard dust. The fingers of the doctor's free hand snapped, and the TARDIS doors flung open in reply, revealing the pitch-black interior as they neared the doorway. Just beside the TARDIS was the bulky silver case containing the dangerous modulator that Picard ordered to have ensured was delivered. Would you mind? The doctor muttered. Oh, yes, of course. Awkward given the hostage hold, Picard bent down enough to grab the handle of the silver case, hefting it with a grunt as he and the doctor both scuttled backwards into the TARDIS, the security team halting a half a dozen steps from the blue box. Picard tensed a little, fully expecting that it would be slightly cramped fit for the both of them, stuffing the small box, but when he backed 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 steps into the interior without hitting a rear wall, Picard's eyes narrowed in mild surprise. Kick the door shut, the doctor instructed, and once the captain again had closed them with his extended foot, the interior of the TARDIS was plunged into total darkness. The Time Lord released him for a moment, muttering under his breath that he felt his way across the control room in the dark. Curious. Picard noted, keeping completely still since he couldn't see anything but the faint illumination coming from the TARDIS's windows. Still, facing the door, he didn't see just how far the good doctor had gone. His attention focused inward. Perhaps it's just the dark, but somehow, there's more room in here than I expected. How long is this going to take, Doctor? How long? This doctor shrugged flippantly, even as he started to carefully fit the coral top into the modulator into the slot beneath the TARDIS console, using the sonic screwdriver as a weak source of light. A few minutes? Less? Assuming this works in the first place. Picard almost whirled around, but disorientation from the darkness stopped him, and he closed his eyes to fight off the brief wave of nausea. What? You're saying there's a chance it won't work? Well, I mentioned that, didn't I? The doctor called back, his voice punctuated by the occasional buzzing of the sonic, both sounds curiously distant. No plan is 110% guaranteed to automatically succeed on the first go, as much as I like to pretend otherwise, and a good chunk of the entire thing is theoretical. So there'll be plenty of need to tweakings to assume it's going to work in the first place, which it might not have anyway. But of course, since I'm staring down the proverbial barrel, I guess it's have to go work on the first go. No error, and a sharp buzz cut through the air. Ow! Worf's sudden shout introduced a new wrinkle into the plan. Commander, sensors are detecting the arrival of the Intrepid. They're less than 5 minutes from arrival. What? Riker paled. They're supposed to be here 4 hours away. They have likely pushed their engines beyond safety limits. Their current speed is considerably greater than the Intrepid's top rated velocity. It is quite remarkable. Yeah, Riker muttered, jaw tightening. Wonderful. Commander, we're being hailed, he announced. Nodding and drawing in a deep breath, Commander Riker turned towards the screen. On screen, the Excelsior-class ship's bridge appeared a few moments later, a balding Starfleet officer occupying the center seat. He didn't look pleased at all, one hand tightly gripping the arm of his chair, the other balled into a fist beneath his chin. In all likelihood, pushing the engines that hard wouldn't have been a prospect without risk, and his eyes flashed when he saw the transmission connect. Commander Riker, the officer greeted, lips thinning. I'm Captain Charles Martins, USS Intrepid. We received your distress call just a few minutes ago. It's regrettable that you couldn't keep your guest confined to his quarters, but fortunately we're ahead of schedule. We're going to transport security personnel to the Enterprise shortly to re-secure him and his vessel. Please prepare to receive them and give them whatever assistance they require into securing the entry of his ship. With all due respect, Captain, Riker snapped, the Doctor has taken Captain Picard hostage, and Mr. Data suggests that trying to breach the vessel, could be disastrous. We can't just break in without risking... I have my orders, Commander, Martins replied, shaking his head. As do you. We're to secure the vessel and its occupant whatever the cost. We'll be within transporter range in 2 minutes. Have your security people keep an eye on that ship in the meantime. Starfleet's going to hear about your performance, Riker. Martin's out. As the view screen flicked off, Riker cursed under his breath, climbing to his feet and tapping his comm badge. He couldn't directly warn the captain without leaving a suspicious sensor record, but maybe the box wasn't completely soundproof. All hands, this is Commander Riker. The Intrepid is arriving and will be transporting security personnel aboard. All hands prepare to receive the Intrepid personnel in 1 minute. Doctor, we're running out of time. Ha! The doctor actually was grinning, still sonicking the modulator. Finally! Doesn't feel like a normal day unless someone says that. All at once, the low hum filled the air as the modulator began to slowly glow. Its shimmer muffled under the TARDIS's console. The glow began to spread throughout the console and into the walls. Picard's protests, his concerns, all died away as the sheer size of the control room came into view. The corridors branching off in all directions, a mass of volume that were entirely beyond his wildest expectations. This is incredible. Yes, the doctor replied impatiently. Ooh, much bigger on the inside box than you would imagine. We really need to skip that right now, because I have to get this old girl moving right before someone out there tries something really incredibly stupid and dangerous. I should leave then, Picard then replied, if reluctantly starting to move toward the exit. No, wait! Stopping dead in his tracks at the urgent shout, Picard whirled back around. The Time Lord was watching one of the TARDIS's hanging monitors, and just as he opened his mouth to speak, the control room suddenly gave a sharp lurch to one side and then the other. I'm sorry, Captain, the doctor replied, shaking his head. Too late. Your overzealous friends have currently in the currently in the shuttle bay, blasting us with those phasers. With considerable enthusiasm, I might add. I'm assuming they're from that other vessel you mentioned. But either way, if you open that door, you'll likely be killed, and the blast will get inside here, and probably just end up disabling my TARDIS all over again. Rather avoid that. But not to worry, you just need to make one quick little pit stop, and I'll happily drop you off on the ship a few days after we left. Pit stop? Stepping away from the doors, he climbed to the control console, peering over the doctor's shoulder. Where? The only place I can go, the doctor replied, hands finally leaving the control lever for one last lever, eyes sliding over to to Picard as a wide grin crossed his face. Good grip now! The lever was pulled, and with a deep roar, like a captive beast finally being freed, the time rotor began to pump. Commander, Data said calmly, the doctor's vessel has vanished from the shuttle bay. I am detecting no signs of it inside or outside the ship. Stand on red alert, Riker replied. Get Martin's security personnel out of here, Mr. Worf. With pleasure, sir, Worf growled. But before he could carry that out, his console gave a sharp chime. Commander, there's a priority subspace signal coming from Starfleet Command. Your eyes only. I don't think we need to bother with the formalities, Mr. Worf. Settling into the center chair, Riker nodded. Put it on view screen. Admiral Ross's face appeared a moment later, looking quite close to having some sort of cardiac arrest. His eyes flickered slightly when he saw that he didn't have Riker alone, as he hoped, but he didn't comment on that, obviously not ready to back down or skirt the issue for which he called. Commander Riker, Ross greeted, his voice brimming with ill will. Martins has informed me that you managed to lose your prisoner and the captain got himself abducted in the process. I thought the Enterprise's crew was supposed to be the best, but apparently keeping one man locked in quarters for 2 days is entirely beyond you. You read the captain's report on this doctor, Riker replied. If anyone could escape from a Galaxy-class starship... Yes, the Admiral muttered, leaning forward. I'm well aware of what Picard said in his report, just as I'm well aware that Picard's protest to the Intrepid's arrival from the start. So I think this entire far-fetched escape is nothing more than a cover for some ridiculous plan to set him free, against specific orders. An interesting theory, Admiral, Riker replied, brows furrowing. Very troubling, I can assure you. Internal sensor logs will show that we did everything in our power to secure the prisoner. You're to take the Enterprise to Starbase 1 for investigation and court-martial, Ross snapped. This is entirely unacceptable. I completely agree, sir, Riker said calmly. Which is why we'll be filing our own injunction with the Federation Council as soon as we reach Starbase 1. Though we, of course, did everything we could to stick to the orders we were given, the orders themselves were completely against the Charter. And we won't rest until everything that's happened here gets shouted on every rooftop of Starfleet Command. Plenty of room on the docket for one more court-martial, sir. Ross's face reddened, then purpled. Then he paled as his hands clenched and unclenched, the options almost being visibly weighed and measured behind his eyes. Your orders to return are rescinded. The Admiral finally growled, every word so slow as if it was being pulled from his lips. Return to your regular patrol. This entire incident is classified. I don't want to hear another word about it so much as whispered across subspace. Is that clear, Commander? Crystal clear, Admiral, Riker agreed, hands folding behind his back as he kept his perhaps the best poker face he's ever managed firmly in place. There's just one more thing. Spit it out, Riker. The poker face on Riker's face, if anything, intensified, his voice quite earnest. The captain wanted to make sure we offered our most heartfelt apologies to this regrettable tragedy. We're here. There was nothing jubilant in his tone anymore, no excitement. In fact, the doctor seemed subdued, as if he were a condemned man walking to the guillotine. As he stepped past the captain, making a beeline for the exit, he shuffled up more than bound. Come along, Picard. I've extended the TARDIS's air shield as far as it will go. We had better get this over with. The world beyond was pitch black, illuminated only by the light emanated from the TARDIS herself. Only that a narrow swath of illumination had puttered out a handful of meters above the vessel. The ground was strewn with rock and dust and little else, a chilling silence hanging in the air as if the universe at large simply ceased to exist. Above them was nothing. No ceiling, no sky, no stars of any kind to lend this world stability. And as Picard followed the Time Lord outside, he felt his heart quicken and his mouth dry. Doctor, where are we? In your Federation's backyard, actually, relatively speaking. The doctor's lips quirked into a small, nervous smile as he slowly led them from the light of the TARDIS's shed by the open door deeper and deeper into the darkness. I was admittedly surprised to discover your people had stumbled onto this place, and quite impressed that you saw the foresight and maturity not to let it destroy you. Doctor, Picard replied urgently, if we're in Federation territory, there remains a risk that your vessel's arrival will be detected by a nearby starship. That's how we discovered your arrival in the first place, after all, by the energy signal that it generated when it materialized. Well, I do appreciate your concern, Captain, but it's rather unlikely, the doctor mused, even as he drew a deep, shuddering breath, looking more anxious by the moment. Why's that? Well, for one, the planet we actually generates its own rather extensive temporal distortion field, so one little TARDIS won't be noticed. For another, the Federation hasn't been born yet. Neither have humans, for that matter, or carbon-based life forms. He gestured around in the surrounding darkness, the inky black sky above. Or stars. Everything that he had seen, Picard wasn't sure he heard correctly. How far back have we gone? Hard to pinpoint, the doctor replied, pulling out his sonic screwdriver, giving the surroundings a quick scan and then checking the readings. Most methods of measuring time are useless here, but I'd factor into the billions of years thereabouts. I see. Those words were rapidly becoming habitual, and something being possibly the only living being in creation was downright unsettling. So much so that Picard didn't even think to question why this planet even existed. What are we doing here? The doctor's didn't reply to that, stopping dead in his tracks as he continued to stare into the shadows, more agitated than Picard had ever seen him, more so even than he had been when he first arrived. If he had to find a comparison, he would have thought the Time Lord was expecting some boogeyman to leap out after them. I know you're out there, the doctor finally called out, head swiveling, entire body turning this way and that, lips twisting. And you know full well I'm here too. No sun's no excuse, so show your stuff and stop hiding. A sudden, loud, booming voice filled the air, resonating like the words of God himself. There was no intention to conceal. The sudden flare of light burst into the room from the darkness ahead of them was nearly blinding, and both Picard and the doctor had to shield their eyes for a long moment before adjusting to the glare. The glow admitted was all but that lit up the world, as bright and as day, but more impressively as far as what it gave off the light. Only 50 feet ahead of them, it was little more than an ancient, oddly shaped arc of stone, shimmering sparks swirling deep within it. Picard recognized it. He had seen only reports, records, and historical files. It had been originally encountered many years earlier by the original Enterprise, under Captain James T. Kirk's command. It had been one of the Federation's first recorded brushes with time travel. Though the device was silent, motionless, it seemed to almost shift in size and position, as if the very air around it rippled. Something primal, something instinctive deep in the captain's chest thrummed in awe and fear, even as he breathed 4 words. The Guardian of Forever. And there's that. Woo! Big one. So the doctor was able to escape escape his captors almost unharmed, thanks to some help from the Enterprise crew. But now he's encountered the Guardian of Forever. If any of you out there are TOS fans for the original series, you would remember the Guardian of Forever, or the Guardian of Eternity, the Guardian of Forever. My bad. Was very instrumental in the award-winning episode, the City on the Edge of Forever. It was one of the first time travel episodes that Star Trek ever did, and I think it won a Hugo Award for storytelling, which was incredible. I was very impressed to see this. So. Also, Pugsley, I'm also doing a. If you're still listening to this, I did a thing at the bottom for my Devastator. See, it's not a still picture. That's really the cam you bought. I would have done a face pic, but I decided that Devi was a bit more interesting than my face. Although you would disagree. But yeah, the city on the edge of the city on the edge of forever, a fantastically written episode from TOS, and it was it in just yeah, I would suggest you go watch SF Debris' review of the episode and its implications of it, because it really messes around with the idea of time travel and what you should and shouldn't interfere with. It's honestly, like I said, it's a brilliant piece of writing, one of the best episodes of Star Trek, not just in the original series, but in the entire franchise. So it's worth looking at. And like I said, this fic draws from so many of the different sources of Star Trek lore out there that we're going back all the way to TOS. And so the Doctor is having an encounter with the Guardian of Forever. So that's that. Let me get a drink of water or something to cleanse my throat. This next chapter is going to be something of an interlude. So, there's that. All right, we're moving on to Chapter 8, Interlude 1. Load up. All right. Wait here, the Doctor muttered, tongue flicking across suddenly dry lips as he gave a nervous chuckle, patted Picard on the back. Don't get too close to it under any circumstances. I know your people discovered it here, but you'd be well off standing in a puddle of petrol, as you might get too close to it. Understood? When the captain of the Enterprise nodded, albeit reluctantly, the Doctor gave a brief approving smile. With a deep, shuddering breath, the Time Lord seemed to draw upon some inner reserve of nerve, a confident swagger settling into his stance as he sauntered up to the Guardian, trying his best to look directly at it without flinching. There you are, the Doctor drawled. Do you know who I am? Yes, the Guardian replied, the voice unconcerned, uncaring. Time Lord, Doctor, but displaced. A stranger to this place. Smart as a whip you are, the Doctor replied, but a lot of his bravo seemed subdued. You know why I'm here, then? Yes. The Time Lord seeks the key, the knowing, the window. You did it once before for my people, long ago, but long from now, but long time ago, the Doctor replied. You probably did it for the Time Lords of this reality as well. I have done it for all Time Lords in all realities. Wonderful, loads of practice then. Can you do it for me now? Give me the key? The displaced Doctor should not pursue this course. The displaced Doctor may return to his own reality through the arch. The arch shimmered, and just like that, images began to fit across it, faster and faster. Cardiff, a Dalek saucer, Unit, the interior of Torchwood, countless places, people, and events from his own universe forming such a tantalizing lure. Despite himself, the Doctor actually edged another step closer, but something deep inside of him protested a cry deep in his heart, stopping him in his place, glancing over his shoulder to consider his blue box. And my TARDIS, the Doctor's eyes narrowed, just a little as he turned back to the Guardian. Can I bring her through as well? The TARDIS is incompatible with the Arch. It cannot pass through. Despite his unease, the Doctor's lips twisted up in scorn. No deal. The displaced Doctor should reconsider. Why? His breath growing a bit rugged, as if the fight or flight instinct was pulling at him. Why do you want me to leave this reality? A kindness to a fellow being of time. The Guardian seemed almost hesitated before continuing. If the displaced Doctor does not depart, the displaced Doctor will seek answers on his own. The displaced Doctor will find those answers. The displaced Doctor will wish he had not. Answers? Answers to what? The Doctor's jaw clenched. To the differences of this reality? Can you tell me what happened to make the history progress so differently? There was a long pause as the Arch hummed, seemingly almost to process the request. When it finally spoke, its tone seemed almost regretful. Such revelation is beyond the scope of my gaze, came the sourest reply. I display that which is. I display not that which has been. What? The doctor blinked, glancing at Picard before turning his attention back to the Guardian. Of course you do. You've displayed the past before. According to the stories, you won't shut up about it, so I display that which is. I display not that which has. Right, right. The doctor lifted his hands. Whatever you say, whatever that means. How about the key, at least? Can you give my TARDIS that which he needs to function properly? The key is always present. The arch will display. The TARDIS will learn. The displaced doctor will leave. More than happy to, the doctor muttered, turning away and starting to move back towards the TARDIS. His entire body was tense, as if expecting he was going to be shot from behind. Well, get us started then. The grinding of the time motor mingled with the low hum of the Guardian's arch as the two structures engaged in some sort of mysterious communication. Images seemed to flash in the arch once more, but these were far, far more rapid than any Time Lord or human or even android's eyes could keep track of. With dizzying speed, the Guardian imparted information on, well, everything. Seated on a rock about halfway between the two temporal entities, Picard and the Doctor had both been silent for some time. Picard because he was absolutely fascinated by the flickering images, his attention focused on it as if he might catch a glimpse of, well, anything. The Time Lord, on the other hand, didn't seem to be looking at anything at all. His head bowed, eyes unfocused, every line of his face shrugging with discomfort. Eventually, the captain noticed that, a bit concern crossing his face. Are you all right? Captain Picard asked, startling the Time Lord out of his near trance. No, the reply was sharp, the doctor's head shaking just once from imminent emphatic denial. I would rather do almost anything than come here, than face that thing. My people are not enamored with it. There are stories and legends about this structure. No, though no Time Lord has dare approach it in countless eons. And believe me, when a race of fearful legends has its own fearful legend, well, that's something to be paid heed to. In later years, it became forbidden to even tell such stories about this structure, to speak of it aloud. The name we give it was stricken from all histories, removed from our own timeline, buried. The Guardian's hum grew louder, and the Time Lord reflexively jumped and glanced at it, only to wince and turn his head away again, almost looking ill. You keep averting your eyes, Picard noticed softly. Is there any particular reason for that? Well, it's just uncomfortable for me to look at it, he explained tersely. Uncomfortable for any species with a strong sense of linear time's passage to can look at. It's a fixed point, you see. It's not just in time, but in everything. It's always existed, the same object, unchanging. As well as in this world, it sits. It existed even in times where there is no planets that have ever existed, no other speck of matter. It exists in all dimensions, not as counterparts like you and I, but it's the same object, the same gate. In theory, if one were to find a way to destroy it, and I couldn't even begin to imagine how, then it would cease to exist in every reality, every moment in time, and the changes to the time stream would be catastrophic. The Time Lords discovered it quite by accident, drawn to the temporal distortions it emits. They were young. The ability to travel through time were only a recent development, raw and rough through crude TARDISes, facilitated by exposure to the untempered schism. They could only travel a few hundred years in either direction, still relied on conventional space travel to explore the universe beyond our own known borders. We were the first, you know. The first to master time travel. So we thought. Imagine the blow to their overwhelming pride, when they encountered this structure on a world older than any they had ever seen, older than the sun it orbited. The structure was a mystery that they couldn't resist, and they were determined to learn its origins. They built a mighty city around it, confident they would learn its secrets. A TARDIS was enhanced by it, made it a vessel capable of traveling to virtually any known point in space and time, and with it they intended to find out who constructed this monument and to time itself. They traveled back 1,000 years, it was still there. They traveled back 10,000 years, it was still there. 100,000, a million, a billion. With each jump, there were fewer species, fewer star systems, fewer galaxies, until they finally came to a great void in the very beginning of creation. This void, this time, where they were truly alone in the universe. And it was still there, still old. It must have been quite a shock for them, Picard noted, rather understating it. It terrified them, the doctor confirmed grimly, to find something that they had no mastery over, no knowledge of. Oh, they fled from this world, abandoned the city, retreated from the structure en masse, running as fast as they could. They returned to Gallifrey, my homeworld, and vowed to never speak of it again. After all, they had taken what we needed from it. I would explain why the ancient city that is said to surround this structure, Picard replied pensively. But why are we here? What did you seek to gain from it? Giving the Guardian another brief glance, the doctor pointedly turned away from it, facing the captain squarely, for as once he held up his hands to make entirely useless gestures accompanied by his words. Like your transporter, coordinates are needed to travel through time and space. If you want to have any control over where you're going, knowledge of the planet, where the planets are, at each moment in time, lack of such knowledge is what restricted the Time Lords to the early days. The doctor gestured vaguely toward the thumbing Guardian. That's how this structure enhanced the first TARDIS, imbued her with incalculable knowledge, how every planet moved, how every civilization developed, a knowledge that the first TARDIS that was then passed down to every subsequent generation, mine included. With that knowledge, a TARDIS could go anywhere, at any moment in time, without fear that it would materialize in the middle of a sun or next to a black hole. Without that knowledge, a TARDIS becomes like the Guardian itself, an object beyond time and space. But, like the power systems, that knowledge applies to your universe alone, Picard replied slowly, nodding as he began to, more or less, understand what the doctor was saying. So you've come here to update your navigation, as it were. But how is it that you knew the coordinates to arrive here? As I said, the doctor replied grimly, this Guardian is a fixed point. It exists in the same coordinates at every moment. Quite literally, it is the only location that remains constant throughout the multiverse. You see why it's so bloody unnerving? Truly an unmovable object. All roads lead to it. In any case, once the Guardian has uploaded its knowledge to the TARDIS's database, she'll be able to go about like normal. Yeah, how long will it take? Picard asked. Can't be sure, the doctor replied. Could be days, could be weeks. The cloister bear sounded. Could be now. Leaping to his feet, the doctor ushered the captain back into the TARDIS and slammed the doors gratefully, letting out a long sigh of relief now that the Guardian was out of sight. Scurrying over to the console, he quickly called up the information on the monitor. Ah! Perfect! Just everything I need, down to the coordinates of your ship at every moment it was built to when it anyway, time to go back to your home, Captain. The drama of my disappearance should settle down after a week. We'll swing by, drop you off, and we'll be gone again before even Data can say a word. Are you sure that's wise? Picard said. And when the doctor cast him a surprising glance, the captain cleared his throat. This universe is so unfamiliar to you. Perhaps I could be some help. I'm quite touched, Captain, the doctor replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. But you've done enough for now. You need to tend to your crew in the coming months. There are going to be a few more challenges in your path. Besides, where I'm going, well, let's just say this is going to be tricky enough with me tossing another unstable temporal element like yourself into the mix. I'll be back, so don't worry. Where do you intend to go? Picard asked, his burrow frowning. Well, for one thing, I need more information on transdimensional travel, the doctor mused, sighing at the console at the readout. It's one of the few things the Time Lords didn't muddle about in too much, which left a decent lack of information. However, unfortunately, there seem to be some first-hand accounts that I can go into, at least some answers that would seem to lie aboard the USS Enterprise. Picard frowned a little, his head tilting. Aboard the Enterprise? I don't recall an incident where that would prove much use to transdimensional travel. Dear Captain, the doctor replied, a hint of a smile crooking the corners of his lips as he began to mark the new set of coordinates. I never said your Enterprise. Ooh-wee! Things have gotten interesting. Oh, hey, Devil. Didn't see you there. Welcome to the chat. You probably came in at the wrong time. Okay, just to catch you up on what's happening in the story. Uh, the doctor had a long talk with Guinan, in which he revealed his past, and she was able to understand him somewhat. Then the doctor made his escape by quote unquote taking the captain hostage before the Intrepid arrived, and he and the captain escaped in the TARDIS. Then he traveled to meet the Guardian of Forever. If you're a Trek, I know you're a big Trek head like me, so you know he went to see the Guardian from the episode City on the Edge City on the Edge of Forever. And now and he just explained why he and his people don't particularly like the Guardian because it's beyond their understanding. Like he mentioned, the Time Lord. Do you remember the city that was around the Guardian when Kirk and his crew went down to see it? That's actually an ancient Gallifreyan city that they built, that the Time Lords of the Star Trek universe created so they could understand the Guardian and try to figure it out. Turns out that the Guardian is something that exists in all realities everywhere, not just different versions, the same thing, and it unnerves the Doctor because they can't understand it. And let's see, and the Guardian spoke to the Doctor and says that he should not. He offered him a way to get back to his own universe, but he couldn't take the TARDIS with him, so he rejected that idea outright. The Guardian said that if he continues to look for answers as to why the Star Trek universe was so different from the Doctor Who universe, he isn't going to like the answer. So now the Doctor is heading off to get some ideas on understanding transdimensional travel from the Enterprise, particularly the original Enterprise. So that's right. In the next chapter, the Doctor meets Captain Kirk. If that doesn't get you hyped for this if it doesn't get you hyped for the next chapter, then you're not a Trek head or a Doctor Whovian or a Whovian. I need some water. It's so hype. I've read this before. I've read this countless times, but I still love this thing. That's why I'm reading it to you guys. All right, I gotta. All right. The next two chapters will be entirely TOS. So I'll try to do my best William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy impressions. I hope I can do Leonard Nimoy's voice some justice. So if you're ready, we're moving on to Chapter 9, TOS 1. First Officer's Log, Supplemental. The Enterprise continues to remain in orbit above the Halkan homeworld, attempting to negotiate the rights to harvest their dilithium reserves. From what the captain has divulged, the Halkans are extremely hesitant to risk parting it. Not for reasons like for greed or avarice, but rather for fear of what could be done with the destructive power that these dilithiums could provide. Though I believe the captain finds their intransient nature frustrating, he also admires the basis of their stand. Indeed, such a civilization would be welcome within the Federation for their principles. Matters have been further complicated by the arrival of a passing ion storm. At current altitude, the Enterprise is being subjected to considerable turbulence and ionized interference. Although the risk is negligible, there have been reports of minor damage and system failures throughout the ship. The importance of securing this trade agreement, however, currently overrides such considerations. Report, Mr. Sulu. Spock quietly instructed, hands folded behind his back as he stood at the helm next to the helm, considering the swirling magnetic storm on the view screen. We are maintaining orbit around with some difficulty, Sulu reported quietly, his eyes narrowing as he considered the readouts. But the storm is intensifying, sir. Very well. When the captain checks in, we will inform him as to. Spock's musings were interrupted by the comm system sparking to life. Kirk to Enterprise. Spock here, Captain. Report on the magnetic storm, Mr. Spock. Standard ion type, Captain, but quite violent. A rough shudder shook the bridge, leading to a wry and unpredictable. Rough ride? If we remain, Spock replied, was as close approximate recommendation as he would get. Stand by to beam up the landing party. Plot an extended orbit to clear disturbance. Kirk out. Comply, Mr. Sulu. Aye, sir. Sulu replied, carefully inputting the new heading. I'll be in the transporter room, Spock announced calmly, even as he moved towards the turbolift, stumbling once more as the ship gave another sharp tumble. Ensign Kara, if you would please send a transmission to Starfleet updating them on our status and the necessary delay. Yes, Commander. The communications to technician, replacing Uhura for the moment, given that she was on the planet's surface, shifted her head to her earpiece as she began to speak, quietly composing the necessary message. Only moments after Spock left, the turbolift's door slid open. Chekhov and Sulu were having a muffled conversation with each other, so didn't look up. Kara did, and blinked in mild surprise when an unfamiliar fellow stepped out. Dressed in a crisp red Starfleet uniform, right down to the boots, his brown hair was nonetheless a little too non-regulation, messier than it should be. A repair kit clenched in the man's right hand, the other behind his back quite casually. He glanced about the bridge, looking both pleased and slightly nervous. Though there were over 400 crew members aboard the Enterprise, and as a result, it wasn't as if they were close personal friends with every single one of them. But still, this one looked completely unfamiliar to her. Hello, Kara said, her tone friendly if a little confused. Who are you? Oh, sorry. Where are my manners? The man replied, friendly smile in place as he approached Kara, extending a hand, even as Sulu and Chekhov glanced over their shoulders, surprised. John Smith, just transferred aboard during our layover at Starbase 5. New engineer. Very excited to be here. The Enterprise. Plum assignment. Very plum. All right, Sulu replied slowly. But what are you doing on the bridge? I was told to come up here, Smith replied, frowning a little as he hefted up his repair kit, the other hand concealed behind it. When the ship shuddered again under the ion storm's effects, nobody heard the faint buzz sound that emitted from behind it. Nobody told you I was coming? Something about the science station being down and not working right? Frowning, Chekhov vacated his station for a moment, moving closer to the science station. He gripped the railings tightly as another sharp tremor buffeted the ship, then peered in front of the station's scope, the others watching him. Smith was a bit anxious, the others two just curious, and Chekhov finally straightened. The engineer drew a deep breath. Very little response from the sensors, Chekhov finally announced. He's right. There isn't a repair order on the computer, Kara noted, brow arched, though nobody signed it. Could be an oversight. All right, said Sulu finally, gesturing to the station, eyes still doubting a little. Help yourself, Mr. Smith. Much obliged. Smith edged over to the station, settling the repair kit down and popping open the access panel on the console. Should be a simple matter, all considered. Just fiddle it around with the rest of the turned from the mumbling to the man as he tinkered with the inner workings of the console, falling quiet. The rest of the bridge crew stopped paying him much attention soon enough, turning back to their own task. And soon nobody noticed that when Smith glanced back over his shoulder nervously. Upon seeing they were otherwise occupied, the red-shirted engineer climbed to his feet and peered into the science scope, adjusting a series of controls on the surface. The moment stretched into minutes until finally the communicator on the helm console gave a sharp beep. Spock to the bridge, the Vulcan first officer's voice piped in. The landing party is aboard. Adjust orbit. Aye, sir, Sulu replied. Adjusting orbit now. Spock out. Well, the entire crew jumped a little at Smith's loud proclamation, staring at him as he straightened up from the science station and backed towards the turbolift slowly, smile firmly in place. All fixed here. I'm just going to go back to engineering to do various engineering things. Everyone's doing a spot job. Really great. Just so, carry on, people. The turbolift's doors finally, mercifully closed behind the man before he could babble anymore. Chekhov and Sulu exchanged glances, and finally Sulu turned in his chair to glance back at the communications officer. Kara, are you sure there was a repair order up here? Sulu asked, brow furrowed. I could have sworn he was acting shifty. Kara sighed and nodded. I checked it in the crew roster for good measure. Everything checks out on both. Chekhov chuckled a little. Violes Gissy Crazy Ones from Starbase 5. Once the turbolift doors closed, Smith gave a long, low sigh of relief, stumbling back against the wall as just a little as he tugged irritably at his collar. It was a long moment before he remembered these turbolifts needed to be manually controlled. Grabbing the little stick handle at the back of the wall, he called up a mental image of the ship's layout, deciding on his next location. There wasn't until the turbolift was on the move again that he began to laugh a little, sort of a nervous giggle. I can't believe that actually worked, he muttered, giggling a little more before drawing a deep breath. It was going so well. He dropped off Picard in his own ready room, no less, and made it his next stop, the 23rd century. The Enterprise at this time period didn't have the means to detect the TARDIS's arrival, thankfully, which means no alarms had been triggered when it materialized deep inside one of the cargo bays. On the older Constitution-class starships, with no replicators on hand and synthesizers providing relatively limited functionality, much of the foodstuffs, materials, and spare parts had to be kept in storage, which meant that the individual bays were actually many times larger than those aboard the Galaxy-class variant, and poorly lit to boot. So he had it tucked deep into the back of the cavernous room, concealed behind stacks of ration crates. He would have set it on invisible running, but he expected there to be more longer than the power reserves could hold up. The energy modulator wasn't a perfect replacement, so he was mostly relying on luck. Lots of luck. More specifically, he needed more information on exactly what happened. Not the events, because he already knew those. The Enterprise landing party, due to mysterious circumstances, ended up switching places, as it were, with their counterparts from an alternate reality due to a transporter accident, with obvious hijinks ensuing. The problem was, for some insane reason, the Enterprise hadn't thought to take measures during even the second transport. The amount of scientific data on was just happened to cause the dimensional shift was negligible. And if he hadn't been trying to maintain his cover, he might as well have scolded the entire crew for being so careless. So records wouldn't suffice. The Doctor needed to board their ship, access their bridge, and use their instruments himself. The TARDIS had a variety of scanners on its own, all of which would be compiling plenty of data, but he didn't want to risk missing anything that the Enterprise's scanners might pick up. It was risky, incredibly so, even though he had taken the basic precautions to break into their computer banks and insert some useful files. Their computers were easier to manipulate than the 1701Ds had been, and he knew there was a chance that they had to refuse to believe him, or would have doubted enough to check with a superior officer. Still, he hadn't been caught, which was wonderful, except he wasn't done, not by a long shot. Even though he programmed the sensors to record the return trip when they unloaded the counterparts of the mirror universe, he still wanted to gather a few more bits of data. It'd be tricky, incredibly so, but there was a small chance that someone would stumble onto his TARDIS. But, what's the fun in playing things safe? According to the report he'd read on the Enterprise D's computer, the universe counterparts, like the party from the original universe's Enterprise, tried to blend in with their new surroundings. Of course, given these particular people were considerably more ruthless and craven than those normally occupied this reality, they weren't going to get away with it for long. But the Doctor wasn't interested in how things turned out. He just wanted his chance to get up close to these doppelgangers. Grunting, he stripped off the red tunic, revealing a blue one underneath. Quickly adjusting it here and there, he crumpled the red one and opened the doors, started to step out. But when he saw Spock and the imposter landing party coming his way, he panicked a little. With nowhere to stash the extra uniform, the Doctor settled on simply dropping it on the floor of the turbolift, and then stepping out with quick, confident steps, marching right past Spock and the landing party. Fortunately, the Vulcan seemed distracted by whatever he believed the real Kirk, who was at the moment acting a little erratic. The Harkins refused to cooperate. Kirk was all but bellowing, even as he shrugged off a scowling McCoy's attempts to raise a hand to speak. We can't let that stand, Spock. Captain, with all due respect, Spock replied, the Hawkins were well within their rights to refuse the pact. Well, yes, Mr. Spock. We just can't let them keep it all to themselves, Kirk replied, spreading his arms as he snorted, sarcasm dripping on every word. It's not as if Starfleet ordered us to secure it. They just wanted us to suggest it, to nudge them gently, panhandle them for generosity. Unless you forget, Commander, I'm still in charge of the ship. Kirk stopped and turned to face the Vulcan. Unless you're thinking of you like to try and change things. That what this is all about? Captain. I thought you were loyal, Mr. Spock. Kurt snarled, closing what little distance remained between them until he was eye to eye with his first officer. Neither had noticed that the blue-shirted crewman who walked past them was moving more slowly with each moment, trying to remain in earshot. But I guess that it's only a matter of time before he started looking at my post. Is that why my protection isn't here? Captain, Spock replied quietly, not flinching or backing away, arching a single eyebrow. This is highly illogical. You are acting more irrationally than usual. Kirk froze at that, his eyes flickering back and forth at the thought. And then he backed up, arms crossed over his chest. Right, of course. Kirk clearing his throat. The mirror Kirk glanced away. I must be tired. Very hard day. My apologies, Mr. Spock. Perhaps you and the landing party should consider resting. The ion storm will be another few hours, minimum. Kurt straightened up, not entirely able to keep the sneer from his face as he muttered. I think I will. We'll give the Hawkins an hour to decide. For their sake, I hope they agree. As you will, Captain. As Kirk and the remainder of the Mirror Universe imposters vanished down a side corridor, Spock continued straight down the hallway, head bowed and clearly thinking hard. The Doctor, for his part, picked up speed again. He had a very clear destination in mind, and as fun as it was to watching this all develop firsthand, he had to get a move on if he wanted to get to sickbay on time. After all, information on the actual distortions that caused the time rifts in reality were only half the battle. An examination of the effect it had on the counterparts could also be very useful, and like before, the measuring tools he had, the better. The blue tunic would hopefully let him seize a medical tricorder and some other useful equipment without drawing too much notice. It was just a shame the real McCoy was currently stranded in a parallel universe. From the files on them, the Doctor would have found the meeting interesting, to say the very least. Fortunately, the Doctor was so busy congratulating himself for his brilliant plan, he failed to realize that Spock had entered the same turbolift he had just vacated. Report, Mr. Sulu. Spock instructed as he stepped from the turbolift, sounding almost distracted. We are moved into a higher orbit, sir, Sulu replied. We are no longer being affected by the ion storm. When Spock didn't reply, the helmsman glanced over his shoulder. The Vulcan still near the turbolift, holding a rumpled mess of a red cloth in his hands. Is everything all right, sir? Sulu asked slowly. There was a uniform in the turbolift, Spock replied, the closest thing he had to a frown as he shifted to stand by the science console, fingering the fabric as if he were thinking it would hold some secret. Unusual. The remainder of the bridge crew glanced at one another, a sense of mild dread spreading on their words as it sunk in. Another moment passed when they suddenly exchanged an argument. When they silently exchanged arguments about who was going to be the one to confess. When Sulu and Chekhov turned back to the view screen, the decision was made, and the communications officer stepped forward. Sir, there was a crewman up here earlier, Kara reported quietly, frowning as she tried to avoid looking away from the Vulcan science officer. An engineer. It was unusual, but he had a repair order to restore function to the science station. The science station was undamaged, Ensign, Spock pointed out, a single brow lifting. Not when I checked, sir, Chekhov protested, getting involved now that the ice was broken. It wouldn't function. Considering that, the first officer keyed a few commands into the science terminal and bent down to peer through the scope, face intent. The others watched him for a long moment as he made adjustments, scanning through the ship's computer until he found what he was looking for. There is indeed a file on him in the crew roster, Spock finally said, straightening his hands behind his back. Despite the apparent evidence supporting the man's existence, he still seemed unconvinced, and it was only after a brief hesitation that he moved to the nearest comm panel, keying it to life. Spock to engineering room. Engine room, Assistant Chief Kale here, sir. Mr. Kale, is there a John Smith listed among your staff? There was a brief pause before Scott replied, before he replied, a bit surprised. No, sir, I don't believe we have anyone like that name aboard. Why? Spock's brow furrowed. A man dressed in an engineering uniform was on the bridge earlier for a repair order that was filed without my knowledge. Furthermore, his file in the computer roster, Mr. Kale, his file is. Are you certain you have no one in engineering by the name? Well, Kale replied, I know our staff pretty well, sir, and that name doesn't sound familiar. Fascinating, Spock muttered. Thank you, Mr. Kale. Spock out. Folding his arms behind his back, his head tilted as he mulled over it for a moment, fully aware of the rest of the bridge crew were waiting for his orders. Normally, I'd call for the captain to make his decision, but the behavior of the landing party has been erratic since their return. I cannot be certain that these incidents are coincidental, but in the event they are, Ensign Kara, if you would please put out a security alert for a man matching this Smith's description, quietly. If he is aboard, it's best not to alert him to our suspicions. Sir, Sulu said slowly, do you think this Smith could be a threat to the Enterprise? I am uncertain, Spock replied, then added firmly, Rest assured, Mr. Sulu, we will find out. And that's the end of that chapter. What a time for the Doctor to arrive into the Enterprise, just when they have to deal with the mirror universe counterparts. I hope my Shatner was adequate. I'm not sure how evil Shatner would sound because we didn't get a chance to see evil mirror universe Kirk, as far as I can remember. I tried to do a decent enough Spock, but I'm not sure it would have done a good enough job. But there's that. Thank you. Thank you, Devil. I hoped my Shatner was very Shatnery. I was very uncertain about my Chekhov because, I mean, seriously, nuclear vessels. Yeah. I can do Sulu pretty much in my sleep, but Chekhov is still nuclear vessels. Whew. All right. So we not only do we have a mirror universe Kirk and company, but we also have the Doctor on board doing doctorish shit. Let's see how that turns out. Sir, I found something. What is it? An incident report from the original Enterprise under the command of James T. Kirk, filed by First Officer Spock. Reportedly, around the time their encounter with the mirror universe counterparts of their landing party, an individual identifying himself as John Smith mysteriously boarded the Enterprise before being apprehended. What did Kirk do with him? Sorry, sir, the report doesn't elaborate. It says that there was an encounter. Starfleet never pressed for details. What is it with 23rd century captains and their independent streaks? Well, could it be him? It's possible, sir. This Smith isn't recorded as possessing the same equipment, but according to the Picard's personal logs, the subject did specify an Enterprise, and Kirk was one of the most eventful ones. All right, it's all we have to go on. Prepare an operative. We'll extract the Doctor as soon as the timeline permits. I order you to let me go! The mirror Kirk spat, all but flailing at the grip of the two burly men as they dragged him down the hall, easily restraining their frenzied struggle. Traitors! Spock! Get these men off me! What is this? Suffice to say, the jig was up. When the mirror universe Captain Kirk had tried to commandeer the bridge and order the planet below be bombarded into submission from orbit, Spock had quickly relieved him of duty. It had been a quick step to the security for them, and the captain had been dragged, screaming and cursing, all the way to the bridge down to the detention level several decks below. The Doctor, who was waiting over an hour for this very thing to happen, made a beeline for the proper section of the ship the moment Spock announced that he was taking command. Now, the Time Lord lurked behind the corner of one of the corridors, watching the drama unfold. What are you doing, Spock? The alternate McCoy demanded from inside his improvised detention cell, with Kirk's ongoing rant overrode any hope of response. You traitorous pig! I'll have you hung by your Vulcan ears. I'll have you all executed. This man surely does not know how to negotiate, Doctor muttered under his breath as he watched they all but toss Kirk in the cell. Is everyone from his universe that bloody loud? I think not, the first officer replied calmly. Your authority on this ship is extremely limited, Captain. The four of you remain here in the brig, and in custody until I discover how to return you from where it is you belong. Has the whole galaxy gone crazy? Obviously, Kirk wasn't trying to pretend he belonged anymore, and looking with his wild behavior, the doctor marveled he lasted so long without being discovered in the first place. What kind of uniform is this? Where's your beard? What's going on? Where's my personal guard? The Spock brow lifted as he replied quite honestly, I cannot answer any of your questions at this time. All right, Spock. The fury in Kirk's eyes had faded, replaced with animal cunning. Whatever your game is, I'll play. You want credits? I'll give them to you. You'll be a rich man. Command of your own? I can swing that too. Apparently, some kind of transposition has taken place, Spock mused, entirely ignoring the bribe attempt as he focused his attention on the problem in front of him. I find it highly interesting, extremely interesting. As their discussion continued, the doctor eased back around the corner, drawing in a deep breath as he considered the medkit that he had borrowed and the tricorder inside. The device was truly ancient by the Enterprise D standards, and from what the doctor's perspective, it might as well have been made of wood. Still, it would serve its purpose, to say nothing of being far less noticeable than his sonic screwdriver. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to gain access to the prisoners without being searched, the doctor tugged his screwdriver from its hiding place, tucked it under his wristband of his pants, and considered it for a long moment. He quickly found a new hiding spot for his sonic screwdriver, tucking it in one of the ship's emergency cabinets, given that he wasn't anticipating emergencies in the near future. It seemed as good a place as any to hide. By the time he finished this and peered back into the corner, Spock was gone. The quartet of the Mirror Universe counterparts were among those The quartet of Mirror Universe counterparts were talking amongst themselves in hushed tones. A Nasego security guard stood beside the force field, arms crossed over his chest. All right, the doctor muttered. Here goes nothing. Around the corner he went, moving with quick, impatient steps as he bore down on the guard with an intimidating scowl on his face. Who are you? The guard stammered as he saw the dog bearing down on him, eyes widening a little. What are you doing here? Who am I? The Time Lord snapped, looking every bit the overworked bureaucrat as he scuttled over to the force field, completely ignoring the scowling Miller counterparts as they spun around to glare at him. I'm one of the unlucky souls trying to keep the medical department running as it is. Its head apparently has gone all screwy. What am I doing here? Nurse Chapel sent me down here to take medical readings. Mr. Spock wanted these people scanned, and so here I am with his express permission. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to get this over with post-haste so I can go back to tearing my hair at trying to catalog the dopamine inhibitor vials and... Curious. I do not recall authorizing Nurse Chapel to send someone. The doctor froze in place, eyes widening. Then very slowly he turned in place to find Spock standing behind him, hands behind his back, flanked by a pair of security personnel with lifted phasers. What the hell is going on here? Kirk bellowed from inside his cell. Mr. Smith, I presume, the first officer greeted, completely ignoring Kirk. If you would please hand Ensign Reynolds the tricorder and step inside the spare containment cell. Sighing, the doctor did as bidden. If he had a screwdriver, he would have sought to disable the guard's phasers, increase power to the gravity plating beneath them, immobilizing them, something. But without it, he didn't have any much options. At least nothing confrontational. Stepping into the containment cell, an alternate plan began to form, even as the guards activated the force field. We have been aware of your presence for 1 hour and 10 minutes, Spock calmly said, standing outside the other field. Considering the timing of your arrival with that of the alternate universe versions of our landing party, I calculated an 85% probability that you would, at some point, seek to make contact with these individuals. I must ask, however, for what purpose have you come aboard the Enterprise, and by what means have you achieved this? Our security systems did not detect your intrusion. That's quite impressive, the doctor replied grudgingly, and a bit embarrassing for me. I don't often feel predictable. As to your questions, I can't answer them. Spock tilted his head just a little. And why is that? A bit of a smile quirked on the Time Lord's mouth as he replied, No starship may interfere with the normal development of any alien life or society. Spock's mouth shifted into the tiniest of frowns, which for him might as well have been a brazen threat. I'm afraid I do not understand. Yes, well, there's something I can tell you, the doctor said. 2122. What's that? And that is? The precise time you should send this lot from the containment cell, the doctor replied, to the same coordinates you beamed the original landing party up from. You're correct. There has been transposition. Your captain and the rest of their landing party are currently in a far more hostile reality, but in approximately 73 minutes, they will attempt to reverse the effect. You must be prepared for that, or their attempt will fail. Spock narrowed his eyes just a little. And how do you know this? The doctor shook his head. I said I can't tell you, not just yet, but once you've brought your captain back, I'll ask for a chance to speak with you both. Alone. Consider my information a sign of good faith. He honestly couldn't tell them too much. For one thing, any information they gathered on him would complicate his past selves dealing with the Enterprise D. If they discovered his name, his TARDIS, or even his screwdriver, it wouldn't matter if the Doctor had succeeded in escaping. He would alter his own timeline, and Picard would greet the Doctor's arrival with considerably more suspicion. So he was going to have to walk a very fine line. Ensign, Spock finally said to one of the security personnel, have Nurse Chapel send a medical technician to examine the altered landing party. See if you can determine what Mr. Smith is looking for. Yes, sir. Should we examine Mr. Smith as well? The doctor tensed. If they tried that, he'd have to go for an escape attempt, regardless of the risk. His biology would be just as recognizable to the future Starfleet as his own TARDIS. No, Spock decided. We wait for the captain's return before doing anything further with him. With that, the Time Lord gave one last brief glance before striding away, head down, undoubtedly already calculating the probability that the doctor's advice was genuine. A few hours later, a pair of security guards came to collect the Time Lord, leading him down a series of corridors and down a turbolift until they reached the Enterprise's main conference room. Stepping inside, the doctor was mildly surprised to see it was occupied only by Spock and Kirk. One glance was all the Time Lord needed to confirm that this was the real one. No barely repressed scowl, no clenched fists, no unfocused violence. Well, almost none. Ah, Captain James Tiberius Kirk, the doctor all but beamed. I must say, it seems like every second entry I came across in my research have 5 references to your ship's exploits. It's quite a pleasure to meet the man whom 100 uniform shirts gave their untorn conditions in service for. Thank you, I think, Kirk replied, a little taken aback as he nodded to security. You gentlemen can wait outside. As for you, Mr. Smith, please, have a seat. Choosing one of the conference chairs, the doctor plopped down on the seat with a content sigh, stretching his arms wide and stifling a yawn as he tested the rotational capacities of the chair, spinning it first one way and then the other, as he seemed to do as he do with every seat he took. A moment later, his legs swung up to the rest of the table, ankles crossing, his hands folded behind his head. Kirk actually looked like he didn't know whether to be amused by this posture, settling for the former, as he smiled just a little, leaning back on his chair. So, Kirk began, Mr. Spock tells me you quoted from the Starfleet General Order No. 1, which, when he asked for the reason for your presence, he also told me that you started running around my ship at the same time as this landing party went missing. Paranoid man would think there's a link there. Oh, there is, the doctor replied matter-of-factly. Just probably not what you're thinking. Is that so? Kirk frowned a little, eyes narrowing. What do you mean? Well, the doctor leaned back in his seat, hands spreading. You more than likely are thinking that your little trip to the alternate universe is some way caused by my presence or actions I undertook. And I can understand the reasons, but in fact my presence here did not cause your misadventure, but is in fact because of it. I wanted to gather information on what happened to you, some clue of how it happened, for independent purposes. But how did you know it was going? Kirk paused as it clicked, and he leaned forward in his seat, suddenly very interested. Time travel. Very good, Captain, the doctor praised. That would explain his use of General Order No. 1, Spock mused. If he is indeed from the future, then his very presence runs the risk of contaminating the timeline, as would any information as to his exact origins or purpose, just as the Enterprise avoids altering the development of a pre-warp civilization. Perhaps he has a direction preventing him from directly interfering with us. On the other hand, continued Kirk, doubt still clearly on his face, what you're telling us could very well be a clever cover story, a way to avoid making up details. For one, Smith isn't telling all this running a risk of changing the future. You told Spock how to get me and my people back, for that matter. I know a thing or two about timelines, the doctor replied, shrugging, and I have a good sense of how to avoid too large a dent in them. For one, your Mr. Spock was successfully retrieve you, regardless of my assistance. My contribution merely saved him a lot of curious, tenuous calculations, though I'm guessing that he made them anyway. I know I'm telling you a line from the future in and of itself is safe, so long as I reveal nothing of your own personal futures. I also know, Captain, the sacrifices you've made to preserve your past. Something in Kirk's eyes flickered at that, his head tilting just a little as his gaze hardened. But still, the moment passed, and he drew a deep breath. So, he said, you know a lot about us. Impressive. But considering the risk, I can't let you go on your word alone. Well, that just means there's a means to confirm what I'm telling you, the doctor muttered, a brief brow lifted. I've learned quite a bit about Vulcans, a bit of a hobby. If you can certainly take my words as genuine, perhaps you would certainly be able to read the intent behind them. Mind meld can accomplish this quite handily. Spock's brows lifted in surprise. You are very well informed of my race, Mr. Smith. However, it is inappropriate to meld with non-Vulcans, and as such I cannot consider it a valid option. Bollocks, replied the doctor, finger jabbering forward. You've done it several times. Always with non-humans, always with the purpose of some mission or another, and you didn't even look halfway about this 5-year runabout. He does have a point, Mr. Spock, Kirk said wryly. And if he's telling the truth, turning him over to Starfleet could be more dangerous than letting him go. Melding with him could give us the answers we need to figure out the next step. Spock considered that, head bowed. Am I assumed this is an order, Captain? No, I wouldn't order you to do it, the Captain replied, shaking his head. I know how you people feel about melding with outsiders. And although you've done it before, I've always considered it above and beyond the call of duty. This isn't something I'm going to force you from you. Spock paused for a moment before inclining his head. In that case, I volunteer, Captain. You are correct. There are too many risks to do any less. Wonderful! The doctor clasped his hands together. This has turned out swimmingly. I'm a bit foggy on the mechanics of the melding, though. Do we butt heads? Because I tell you, I've been looking for a much less painful method of linking between. I will initiate the meld, the doctor Spock replied, finally interrupting when he suspected the guest wasn't going to stop anytime soon. Please simply relax and be silent. Right, of course. Moving with deliberate care, Spock walked over to the captive's chair, standing behind him, and he arched down with both hands. His fingers found the appropriate blood vessels and nerve points, although the Vulcan noted that they were placed slightly different from those of most humans. Drawing in a steady breath to prepare himself, Spock's eyes closed as he began to concentrate, intoning each word. My mind to your mind. My thoughts to your thoughts. The moment the connection was made, Spock was lost. The man's mind was ancient, labyrinthian, and with a discipline that would make a mockery of centuries of Vulcan self-control. Beneath the bumbling, beaming, rambling exterior of this strange man, the mind was sharp as a blade and unyielding as a mountain. Although Spock was the one who initiated the meld, he suddenly felt as if he was being pulled along, dragged deeper and deeper into the flashing lights and swirling colors. Countless worlds flickered past, more than the Enterprise had ever witnessed, more than any ship of this in Starfleet had ever even so much as drawn near to. Strange species and wonderful and terrifying civilizations whose histories could be swallowed up in that of every race the Federation had 10 times over. Even after he had the information he needed, even after he confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that this man had spoken the truth, Spock couldn't disengage. But he should have. Every moment that passed, every instant Spock did not pull away, bits of his own mind were chipped away, lost in the nexus of thought and emotion. At that moment, the Vulcan was more vulnerable than he had ever been, open and exposed to the meld. Spock could become little more than clay to mold it into whatever shape the doctor chose. This stranger could implant a thought, any thought, into the science officer's mind, or simply crushed his very being like an insect underfoot. But he did none of those things. And then mercifully there was a withdrawal. Not by Spock, but by this behemoth of a mind who pulled away with all the care of a fond father, gathering up all the fragments of the Vulcan's tattered psyche and knitting them back together with practiced skill. The doctor's mind finally untangled itself from the tendrils of Spock's, tendrils that even reached out in supplication, not wanting to be removed from all that knowledge, all that experience, all that time. And then, with thunder and ice, reality came crashing down. Contact broke abruptly as Spock staggered back, hands lifting reflectively to clutch his head, sweat beating down his skin from the brief, violent telepathic contact. Kirk's hand snapped out to steady him, but the Vulcan waved him off, drawing on his inner reserves and a slow breath to regain his inner and outer equilibrium. The doctor, for his part, remained seated, head tilted, unruffled, and clearly none the worse for wear. Clearly, their exchange had been a great deal less uncomfortable for him than in the time he tried it with one extremely untelepathic human. Spock's dark eyes flickered back to the Time Lord as he finally uttered the only word that really suited the experience. Fascinating. Thank you, the doctor replied. Spock was silent for a moment as he continued all that he had seen, heard, and felt. Already much of it was fading, becoming less distinct, less specific, but enough detail remained for him to know that the danger he had been, and the consideration this man had shown, it surprised him to say the least, that someone held captive and facing possible imprisonment wouldn't have used any available weapon. Tilting his head, he moved forward a few steps from the prisoner, and when Kirk naturally followed, the Vulcan lowered his voice to a near murmur. He could have supplanted my will, Captain, Spock noted, and in doing so compelled me to convince you to release him. My word would have undoubtedly been sufficient to convince you, and yet he chose instead to help me preserve my sense of stealth. He did not take advantage of my vulnerability. You've seen my mind, the doctor called out from across the room, hurrying every word. You know why I didn't, why I wouldn't. Indeed, the Spock's brow lifted as he turned his attention back to Kirk, his voice returning to normal volume. Captain, I am aware that he is an intruder. However, knowing what I know now, I can see no logical reason to keep him in our brig. And of course, the risk to the timeline would be considerable. Kirk, for his part, returned to the conference table, perched on the edge of it instead of at a seat. Arms crossed over his chest, he mulled over the matter for a moment, glancing from the doctor to Spock, then back again. His lips pursed a little at the thought, and he finally hopped back to his feet. Decision made. I don't know who you are, Captain Kirk began, his arms spreading, and my duty as a Starfleet captain wouldn't let me keep this completely a secret. I can't order my bridge crew to pretend they didn't see you, or my security staff deny ever keeping you in custody. I certainly won't turn them against Starfleet command in that way. But Mr. Spock seems to know you well enough, and that sort of commendation doesn't come easy. That's enough for me. So if you promise to leave quietly, I'll make sure our report to Starfleet isn't too specific. Really? The doctor's brow raised a little, mimicking Spock's typical gesture. I'm surprised you get away with that. It would not be the first time the log has been selectively entered, Spock replied, sounding almost wry. There'll be questions, Kirk admitted. But it'll be a long way from Starfleet headquarters. Out here, you'll find that starship captains have the authority to make our own decisions and defend them. Well, I'll leave it to your expertise, the doctor replied agreeably and hesitated. There is one more thing, however, I'd like to ask for. We're setting you free and you're asking for more? Kirk actually grinned at that. I'm starting to like you myself. As I said, the doctor replied, I came here for information related to the transporter accident that left you stranded in the alternate reality. The data could be useful, and I'd be ever so grateful if I could just take it with me when I departed. Kirk hesitated and then glanced to his first officer. Mr. Spock? The information is quite harmless, Captain. Spock replied. All right. Kirk nodded himself and smiled at the doctor. Promise not to make my day any more uneventful, and Mr. Spock will set you up with what you need. Less than 10 minutes later, the doctor returned to the cargo bay, having retrieved his sonic screwdriver from its hiding place. He had also acquired a set of data chips from Spock containing all the information that he had been looking for, and even some files on other magnetic storms the Federation starships had encountered, for comparative purposes. Ah, good day, he muttered, drawing in a breath and smiling. Very good day. Now, where did I park? He almost forgotten how the bloody huge the cargo bay was, and although he had certainly an excellent memory at finding things, the dimming light was not helping. Still, now that he didn't have to deal with impending capture, he was more than happy to wander about until he found it. And as he worked through the rows and rows of supplies, he began to whistle a jaunty tune, an old song about riding a donkey, legitimately riding, not the less savory interpretations. Then came the next snag in his plan. Hold it right there. Before the doctor could so much as twitch, the man stepped from the shadows of the cargo bay, dressed in a red tunic of a security officer. He leveled one of those old-style phasers in the Time Lord's direction. This cargo bay is off limits to all but technical supply technicians. What are you doing down there? I think there's been a misunderstanding, the doctor replied slowly, being certain not to make any sudden movements. He wasn't looking to end this day being stunned. I'm down here with the permission of your captain and Mr. Spark, no less. Legitimate this time. Just use your flippy thing and give him a call. He'd be more than happy to vouch for me. Old chums we are, academy buddies. Grew up together, shared blankets when we were tots, stole each other's toys. Wait, do Vulcans have toys? So, the man replied, eyes narrowing. You're a friend of the commander's? I just said that, didn't I? The doctor replied haughtily. And don't think I won't report you. Prove it, the man replied, tossing something small to the doctor with a flick of his wrist. Reflexively, the doctor caught it and opened his hand curiously. The small cylindrical beacon flashed with a light at the tip resting in his palm. It took him all but 2 seconds, and the sight of the grin on the human's face realized what this was probably for. Oh, damn! He waited long before the drop. He wanted nothing more than to drop the device, if not throw it away with all the force he could muster. But it was too late. He could already feel a tingle in his chest and the low hum in the air. As the feeling of crawling ants began to spread over the doctor's body, he rapidly disintegrated his mouth. His rapidly disintegrating mouth twisted into a scowl, muttering as he faded away into a shimmer of transport energy. I can't believe I fell for that. When the transporter stream faded, the doctor found himself facing no less than 4 security personnel, all dressed in unfamiliar uniforms, equally unfamiliar phasers pointed at the Time Lord's direction. Behind them, a bustling control room, complete with blinking lights, touch controls, considerably more flashier than those of the ship he just left. Wonderful, the doctor said a bit wryly, nonetheless lifting his hands slowly. Humans with weapons, that's a novelty? As he spoke, his eyes flitted back and forth, considering his surroundings. This place was considerably more advanced than the Enterprise. In fact, given it didn't match any Federation designs he recalled, the doctor suspected that even Picard's ship would be considered an antique by comparison. He considered the possibility that there was another ship out there, perhaps hiding with stealth technology, but if that was the case, he couldn't manage how they needed to tag him to bring him aboard. How many other two-hearted life forms could have been on the Enterprise? Licking his lips, he considered the pad he was standing on. Like a transporter in design, of course, but something about it tugged at him. A quick glance around the room, the displays on various screens confirmed it. A temporal transporter, he announced to one of the guards beside him, fingers crossed as he peered about the bridge, weight shifting on his heels and toes and back again. What a dull way to get around. Nothing for dangerous. How many times did you lot get away with using that before my brain started to get all knitted? Captain, one of the security personnel said, trying not to look annoyed by their chattering guests, rather failing abysmally at that. Our guest has arrived. One of the crewmen, who was seated aboard a broad console halfway across the room, climbed to his feet, approaching the group with his hands folded behind his back. He was an average height and build of a human, slightly young in appearance, with dark hair and a surprisingly friendly demeanor given the circumstances. Doctor, said the man quietly, smiling, I'm Captain Charles Duquesne. Welcome to the relativity. Oh, yes. Well, that was a pretty good one. Kirk, we had an interesting encounter between Kirk and the Doctor. We had a mind meld between Spock and the Doctor, which showed just how cool the Doctor is since he didn't fuck over Spock. And now we're dealing with the relativity. Any fan of Voyager, the dozens that are out there, we'll know that the relativity is far, far into the future. It's actually a time ship capable of transporting people from specific time periods like you would transport from one ship to another. It's awesome. But yeah, now he has to deal with time traveling humans. So what's going to happen? So with that out of the way, so we're just going to take a small break while we do this. Devil, just to let you know, the Devi Cam is up and running. Hi, this is not a screenshot or this is not a screenshot or a still footage or what have you. This is actual footage of Devi, right there, and he's hungry. So if you guys want to donate for some food for him, that's okay. And we're gonna take a small break. So stretch your legs, get something to drink. I know I am. In about 5 minutes, we're gonna come right back, and we're gonna knock out 2 more chapters and then call it a session for this week. So, 5-minute break. All right, we're back, sort of. I'm just gonna take taking a small break. See if anyone else wants to filter in. But we're also going to be, we're just going to take a small little respite before we get started with the next two chapters. Of course, if you're new here, this is Friday Night Fanfiction, where I, Tiger Curl, read fanfiction to you guys. As I said before, you could be anywhere in the world, but I'm glad you're here with me. Thank you. Right now, on the screen, you're seeing the Debbie cam for my boy, Devastator. And he's giving you the thumbs up. I hope you can see that. The thumbs up is right here. Let's see. Nothing much has been going on. I had to put some honey in my throat. If you're talking for a long time, honey is a good way to keep your vocal cords loose and ready. And my soda has completely waterlogged, so I'm gonna have to throw that out, but it's okay. I got some water right here. Okay, I will consider it Pugsley, maybe for next time. I just put Debbie up there because, well, he's Debbie, and I like Debbie. Alright. I think I'll start in about another 2-3 minutes. Just in case anybody needs to get something to eat, something to drink, or just to settle in once again. Alright. Alright. My mom's. I just walked in and checked on my mom. She's watching a Liam Neeson movie, the one that came out this year. I might give it a watch. I'm not sure after this. Depends how I feel. Alright. I used to be mad at Liam Neeson for the comments he made, but I can now kind of understand it. Hindsight being 2020. I wouldn't say what he said was like supremely uber racist. It's just how he felt at the time, but he doesn't feel that way now. So it's like the whole Lars Sullivan situation, because Lars said some crazy like I mentioned on my previous stream. Lars said some crazy shit back in the day, but I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt as long as he keeps his nose clean and he doesn't actually feel that way now. So I'm watching you, Lars. Right? Alright, if you're still with me in the chat, hit some buttons. Hit it up, please. Alright. And Pugsley's only interested in me because she thinks I'm handsome. I don't know where she got that idea from, but I might consider doing face cam next time. I'm not sure if you guys want to watch me keep reading this while my face is on camera, but that's up to you. Up to the fans. Okay. Let's see. Devil is still here. Got three people watching. That's more than enough, really. As long as you guys are enjoying this story that I'm reading to you, I hope you guys are enjoying it. I really enjoy this story. I have said it many times. I enjoy this fanfic a lot, and I created this little show just so I could read it to you guys. I hope you enjoy it. So with that, let's get back to it. Last time, now the Doctor has to deal with the Temporal Prime Directive and the Time Federation. Alright. Everybody ready? Let's get to it. Chapter 11. Relativity. Welcome to the Relativity would generally suggest one act a bit more welcoming. The Doctor was seated in a cold, uncomfortable metal chair in front of an equally cold-looking table in a small, dark room, 2 decks up. Hold on, I gotta check this message right quick. Oh, it's okay, Gabby. Pugsley has to go because she's going to go see Aladdin. God rest her soul. Anyway, I'm just going to get back to it. The Doctor was seated at an uncomfortable metal table in front of an equally cold-looking table. In a room 2 decks below the bridge. The walls were featureless, smooth, white, and there were no visible cameras or sensors. The Time Lord knew he was likely being watched. A pair of security guards flanked the only exit, and just across the table, Captain Duquesne sat in what looked like a far more comfortable chair. His head tilted slightly. Well, you'll have to excuse the accommodations, Duquesne replied, frowning slightly as he considered the sonic screwdriver in his hand. Security had removed it from the doctor after a brief search. The device far easier to find given the form-fitting, outdated Starfleet science uniform he still wore. But considering all that we have learned about you, it was decided that we could take no risk. Ah, read up on me, have you? The doctor said, lifting his brow and looking a bit smug. Interesting tale? Yes, a very entertaining tale. Something in the way his emphasis on that last word drew a bit of curiosity from the Time Lord, but Duquesne didn't seem inclined to elaborate yet. How did you lot track me, anyways? Does Picard know about this? Oh, we're over 500 years from Picard, Duquesne replied. And from what it's worth, he didn't betray you. At least not consciously. A personal log he made 3 weeks after your initial encounter happened to mention that you told him that you were going to search for another Enterprise. Slip of the tongue, really, but that log, along with the hundreds of others from the Enterprise crew, became public domain about 50 years after Picard's death. Our analysis happened to link the mention of a very brief, very cryptic report made by Commander Spock from the original Enterprise, mentioning that he'd been visited by a John Smith. I don't suppose that's your real name. No, the doctor replied, waving his hand slightly. Just a quick little alias to get around without raising too many questions. What is, then? Duquesne leaned forward in his seat, looking far less friendly. Your name, I mean. Well, you can just call me the doctor. The captain smiled humorously. No, seriously. I think we can all be a little honest here, one time traveler to another. We both know you're not the doctor. The doctor's brow furrowed a little, his own amusement replaced with a little bit of confusion. I'm afraid I don't quite understand. I thought you did your research. Oh, I have, Duquesne replied. Just not myself. Learning more about a time traveler called the Doctor was actually a prime goal in the temporal agency called upon its inception. Finding you, learning more about you, your methods, your technology, your impact on our history. Ever since you escaped from Picard's Enterprise, Starfleet has had a perpetual interest in you, but one that was rather difficult to tend to, given time travel mechanics at the time were quite clumsy and somewhat inaccurate. We didn't have the means to observe or investigate without risking contamination to the timeline. As soon as we did, rest assured, we threw all available resources into it. I personally went on several fact-finding missions in my younger years. Oh, good for you, Bunch, the doctor replied. Though his tone was jovial, he admitted he was a little more curious. And what did you learn from your little book report? Duquesne climbed to his feet and began to pace the room, quite casually, folding his arms behind his back. As you know, the captain began, there are numerous stories of a doctor across 100 different worlds. Most of these were snippets, little more than myths and legends. But they're there. What's also on file are the historical records you were examining, detailing incidents where some mysterious man saves the day. And I'll confess, with our own analysis looking at them 20 years ago, there were signs of possible involvement of a higher alien intelligence. It was then that our directive was made. A simple mission. To find the doctor and bring him in for open discussion. So we went back, he continued, further and further to each incident we found on record. Each hint that the doctor might have been there for a visit, and each time our operatives found nothing. No dilemma, no danger, and certainly no time-hopping hero coming to save the day. Reports that were filed, stories that were told on 100 worlds seemed to come to us somewhere out of nowhere. Rumors. We never met anyone matching your description, or really anyone who seemed atypical for the population, even when we went to the specific time and place of the reported incident. You're the first encounter we've had with any such doctor we've ever had, and I assure you we've devoted a lot of time in finding him. Well, the doctor replied, a small smirk hiding his growing unease. You don't necessarily think you'll be able to simply nab him, do you? Lifting a brow, Duquesne didn't respond, simply gesturing to the Time Lord seated in front of him. That doesn't count, the doctor scoffed, arms crossed on his chest. I'm rather out of my element here. If this were my universe, I'd be running temporal circles around you lot, and probably stealing all your lunch money as well. For lunch. In any case, I don't see what this has to do with anything. What I'm saying is, Duquesne replied calmly, that there is no doctor. There are no Time Lords, no Gallifreyan technology, or any of these other things you spoke of during your visit to the Enterprise. There were stories, yes, legends and tales, and as I said, even reports that were somewhat historical in nature. But we've examined hundreds of them and haven't found any evidence that then they ever happened. Not on Earth, not anywhere. So, would you like to hear my theory? Not particularly. My theory, the captain continued, ignoring the doctor's snide comment, is that you're not who you claim you are. You're just some unusually clever fellow with a time machine who decided to pay a visit to a 20th century ship and dazzle them with your brilliance. You found stories of a handful of planets of this doctor figure and decided to adopt the persona as your own. The Enterprise D crew described you as incredibly advanced, but I think in this time frame, here and now, you're nothing too special. Is your ship bigger on the inside than the outside? The doctor countered, brow lifting slightly. Duquesne smiled a bit at that, but didn't seem convinced. They had holodeck technology even in the 24th century. Duquesne's hands spread slightly. The senses can be fooled easily. The mind, too. Everything Picard reported during his captivity could have been implanted memories. Your little stunt with the Outrun star seems to have been quite impressive. Unless you knew what would happen in advance and therefore had all the time you needed to devise a solution. We're not exactly thrilled with your interference there either. It took quite a bit of effort to restore the timeline after you intruded upon it. Restore the timeline? What did you... The doctor paused for a moment and his eyes went wide, just a little. You couldn't have. Rogue asteroid, Duquesne replied. Completely destroyed the colony a week later, before anyone on it could depart. Safer than trying to interfere with the Enterprises and your initial rescue. Fortunately, corrections of that nature are assigned to different ships altogether. And that's not a duty I would have savored. The doctor fell silent at that, eyes fittering side to side, his jaw tightening, and every body tensing with almost painful. So really, Duquesne continued, considering his pad, the only concrete feats you managed were to overcome a computer system that by our standards are antiquated, and so time travel, which, as you can see, we can do as well. I suppose, if you can call it that, the doctor replied distractedly, drawing a deep shuddering breath as trying to fall back on his humor. I mean, a 2-year-old careens around a living room and manages to avoid crashing into most of the furniture, and we call that walking. Very funny, Duquesne replied. Now who are you really? Haven't you been listening? The doctor gave a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm the doctor. If you're gonna stick to this lunatic fairy tale, then bridge to Captain Duquesne. Stifling a sigh, Duquesne leaned back, head tilting slightly. Duquesne here, go ahead. Captain, Operative Manning has contacted us from Kirk's Enterprise. He reports that he cannot access the interior of the subject's ship as required instructions. Damn! Duquesne paused for just a moment. Can we beam the entire thing here? We can't seem to get a lock on it. Very strange readings coming from it, sir. Stand by. Keep the temporal shielding up. Duquesne out. Fox in the hen house? The doctor asked with mock concern, brow lifted. Looks like, Duquesne said softly. It seems you left a mess back when we picked you up. Your ship is going to be discovered by the original Enterprise's crew sooner or later. By now, as far as the timeline outside this ship's temporal shielding is concerned, they already have it. Eventually, the Starfleet back then will find a way in, and that technology could advance the Federation beyond the point it's ready to reach. To say nothing of the risks her enemies could find if they found a way to get in as well. So you're going to help us fix the mess you made of the timeline? The doctor laughed, flat out, in Duquesne's face, his own face reddening with forced mirth as the pair of security guards shifted restlessly, not exactly pleased with his reaction. Duquesne, for his part, just sat there, waiting for the outburst to subside, his arms crossed over his chest. Oh, that is rich, the doctor contorted, laughing in his seat, eyes gleaming like chips of ice. I didn't cremate this mess, you did! When you brought me here, you nits! I was just on my way out, perfectly prepared to meander on my merry way with none the wiser aboard the ship except the 2 lads who were perfectly happy to let me meander on my merry way. And then you lot waylay me and bring me to an entirely wrong time period, leaving my highly advanced and extremely mysterious TARDIS parked in their cargo bay. And now you're here, blaming it on me with all the narrow-minded, self-centered egotism of, I think I get the point. he interjected, lifting a hand. I don't care! The doctor's voice bellowed as he leapt to his feet, and the pair of security guards raised their phasers, holding their fire only at Duquesne's gesture. I'm not done talking, the doctor snapped, disgusted curl at his lip. You people wipe out an entire colony, murder every man, woman, and child on it for the sake of preserving the timeline, and then manage to bugger it up yourselves. You accuse me of risking the integrity of your past, but if the human race had reached the point where it can callously, cravingly kill off its own people for some misplaced sense of temporal stagnation, then it seems that your past could use some bloody tampering. Duquesne didn't respond. He didn't speak at all. But he didn't flinch from the doctor's anger, didn't get to his feet. He just watched the captive quietly, evenly, not thinking to explain himself or justify his actions of his people. After a long silence had passed between them, he said a single word. Done. Scowling darkly, the doctor flopped into his seat. Quite. All right, Duquesne said. What's it going to take to help you with your help to get your ship out of there? Returning to the Enterprise would be a very good start, the doctor replied, head tilted. I'm the only one who can access the TARDIS, and if you want to get in, you'll have to bring me along for it. I'm not about to fall for that. And if you're as brilliant as you claim, then we know you must have something planned for just this eventuality. A key under the mat, some sort of override. We can certainly negotiate if it's there, or you can spend a few months in the brig. The Relativity has enough supplies and power reserves to last years, even with temporal shielding raised. The doctor squirmed in his seat a little, eyes slipping away from Duquesne, his thoughts all but painted on his face. With one hand, he probably would on the one hand, he probably would have liked nothing more than to punt the captain into an airlock. On the other, he wasn't exactly thrilled with the prospect of sending him too long in confinement. With each passing moment, the defiance in his shoulders seemed to subside, his head bowing lower and lower, the anger in his eyes cooling and turning into quiet consideration. Fine. Tilting his head, Duquesne leaned forward a little bit. I'm sorry, what? Damn you, I said fine, the doctor snapped, not meeting Duquesne's eyes. There is a way. A slow smile spread across the captain's face, one of quiet satisfaction. Tell me. My sonic screwdriver. Frowning slightly, the captain lifted the metallic wand and slightly, brow lifting. Yes, that. Sighing a little, shoulder slumping, the Time Lord explained. A while back I was stranded on a place without access to my TARDIS. Long story, you don't care. But the point is, I made sure to develop a recall link, which I of course included in the screwdriver. Much like anyone with a proper phone number can call it at any point in time, anyone with the proper frequency can summon it from any point in time. Well, that's how it's supposed to work anyway. Supposed to? Well, the doctor sounded almost embarrassed. There have been some issues with the Sonic not quite having the range to reach the TARDIS any more than a few hundred feet or 100 days. However, since you have a lad on the Enterprise, it would be simpler to match the frequency Sonic's transmission through your link with him. The TARDIS, gorgeous thing that she is, has no such range issues, and would transmit the signal back to your ship and come here in a flash of brilliance. Duquesne considered the doctor for a long moment, as if trying to find any signs of deception, but the Time Lord didn't even meet his gaze. Shoulders lowered and eyes slumped. All right, the captain said finally, noting and offering him the screwdriver. I'll go open the channel, and you can call your ship to here. I have conditions, the doctor replied irritably, eyes narrowed as he flicked back up. The captain snorted slightly, hardly surprised. All right, tell me. From what I can see of you lot, came the muttered reply, you're utterly obsessed with keeping your timeline neat and tidy. Therefore, the less time travelers about, the better. So you are better off that I'm not here in this universe, and I assure you I'm trying very hard not to be here. The entire reason I'm scurrying about like this. So if I retrieve the TARDIS from the original Enterprise's time frame and bring it here, and if I color only in the lines you so dearly provide me with, then I ask for your help to help me find a way to return to my own reality. Your accumulated knowledge, resources. If we can work together, the problem can be handled. It can hardly vanish on its own. Duquesne's lips thinned as he considered it, fingers drumming on the desk for several long minutes, and then he finally nodded. All right. I still think you're lying through your teeth about who you are, but I suppose I can at least give you the chance to prove yourself. Wonderful! The Time Lord hopped to his feet, startling the guards to brandishing their phasers a bit more excitedly. Well, we'll need a little bit more room than this. To your bridge? After a couple of minutes, they stood on the Relativity's main bridge, the same place the doctor had initially been brought on his arrival. At Duquesne's gesture, all the guards had been keeping an eye on the doctor moved away, shifting to form a semicircle about 10 feet away, standing between the doctor and the temporal transporter. Clearly, the captain was half expecting the doctor to make a break for it, but the doctor's face only had resignation on it as he reached out his hand to the captain. Right then, hand it over. You do realize, Duquesne said, cleaving the screwdriver just out of reach, that if the lights are so much as flicker when you use this thing, or if you inch even towards the temporal transporter, there are half a dozen very big, burly security personnel ready to tackle you to the carpet. Same if the blue box appears and you reach for the door. Oh, don't be daft, the doctor replied, looking quite innocent as he reached out, poignantly snatched the device away and examined it mutely as to make sure they didn't scratch it. You lot are so very advanced and knowledgeable after all. I'm sure you have nothing to worry about. Uh-huh. Signed, Duquesne turned to one of his junior officers. Lieutenant Kale, open the channel to Operative Manning. Nodding, the younger officer turned his attention to the console and tapping on the command sequence. Channel open. Operative, the captain said, glancing once more at the doctor. We're about to do something on our end. Keep an eye on the subject's ship. Alert us of any change. Aye, aye, sir. Standing by. Duquesne said once as he glanced over, gesturing for him to begin. All right, the doctor muttered, lifting his screwdriver and pointing it towards the spot midway between him and the security personnel. Plenty of room for the TARDIS. The device buzzed to life, the pitch reaching higher and higher with each moment. I'm piggybacking your transmission, linking to the TARDIS, and uploading the recall sequence. Just give it a moment to compensate for temporal lag and... Captain! The voice on the other end mingled with the whirling of the TARDIS's departure. The subject ship appears to be fading away. I think it's working. Of course it is, the doctor drawled. Give a few more moments to reach us, Captain, and I'll park it right here on your front lawn. Duquesne, indeed the entire bridge crew, turned towards the spot the doctor had indicated, waiting patiently for it. And a grin did cross many of their faces when they realized that the same whirling sound, A grin crossed their faces when they heard that same whirling sound, this time on the bridge itself. But as the seconds ticked by, there was no sign of the doctor's blue box, and it didn't look like it'd be materializing anytime soon. As they turned to ask the doctor what was going on, Duquesne's words died in his throat as he realized the TARDIS was indeed materializing. More specifically, the TARDIS was materializing around the doctor. One of the security guards lunged, but even half-formed, the TARDIS's walls were still solid enough to block the man's hands from getting at the Time Lord. Just before the TARDIS materialized completely, the doctor lifted up a hand to wave goodbye, smirking and mouthing just two words. I lied. A split second later, he vanished from sight, leaving only the imposing blue box in its place. Two of the security guards hurled against the door, pushing and pulling, throwing themselves against it, and when they failed, stepping back and drawing their phasers set to maximum. Taking firing positions, they dropped to one knee and lifted their weapons, fully intent on blasting their way inside. No! Duquesne shouted, stopping the guard in their tracks. We can't risk firing a high-intensity phaser blast this close to the temporal transporter. One stray shot could blow half the ship apart. Try penetrating the interior with sensors instead. Compensate for the spatial distortions and get me a set of coordinates. We'll get a boarding party aboard before the bastard runs for it and... Captain? Lieutenant Kale, now her voice armed and a little more incredulous. He's bypassed our security encryptions and getting into our systems. Our databanks are being downloaded. I'm attempting to lock him out, but nothing seems... Damn it! Duquesne dropped his original thought, paling as he moved over to hunch over her console, fingers dancing across the consoles. Start a system reboot. See if that slows him down, and dump all unnecessary files. Complete burn procedure. Trying, sir. No response from control. And then all of a sudden, every monitor on the deck throughout the ship, including those in the brig, flickered and shut off to their various analysts and displayed. Instead, they showed two more words. Nothing special? Duquesne's jaw dropped. Son of a... The power went out. Lighting, computer monitors, propulsion, everything except for life support shut off at once. The normal background hum of the relativity's operating systems fall into an unnerving silence. There was a brief scuffle as crew members throughout it moved to find flashlights and tricorders. And then on the bridge, a whirling howl as the TARDIS's time rotor began to operate again, breaking the darkness with the pulsing, ghostly light atop the blue box as each flash caused it to fade a little more, and a little more, and a little more. Within moments, it was gone, leaving a handful of very confused, very angry Starfleet officers behind. Oh yes, and with that, yes, the temporal agency learned that they have made of master time travel, but they are not time's lord. Yeah, when I first read that, I really didn't like Duquesne. I really hated Duquesne and his smugness. Yeah, temporal transporter is nice, but nothing beats the TARDIS. Nothing. All right, one more chapter to go, and then we will call it for this particular session. And let's see. All right, this next chapter. And now I remember this chapter. Devil, you would be very interested in this chapter because this chapter we're going even further back from TOS. We're going to Enterprise. That's right. We're going back to the NX Enterprise, captained by, of course, Jonathan Archer. Hopefully, we can get through this chapter without Jonathan Archer having the crap beaten out of him like he has always had in every single season of Enterprise. Seriously, as much pussy as Riker gets is about how many times that Jonathan Archer gets tortured, kidnapped, or beaten within an inch of his life. I can't even remember an episode where he wasn't bruised or bloodied. Seriously. All right, let's get down to it. Chapter 12, Detroit. It took a while longer for the Doctor's smug satisfaction and his burning anger to fade away. He had initially set a course back to the Ultron 5 colony, fully intended on stopping this newest catastrophe before it to take root. Hell, he'd go back to the Enterprise and seek Picard's help if he had to. But he had no doubt that the starship captain would turn down the opportunity to save thousands of lives again. But as the hundreds and hundreds of plots and plans whirled throughout the Doctor's mind, a grain of something far less welcoming began to wriggle its way in. The TARDIS had very well reached its destination when the Doctor suddenly pulled her to a stop, leaving her in deep space, a few dozen light years and a score of temporal years from their destination. Pragmatism had settled in because, to put it simply, he knew there was no point. He could have stopped that asteroid, yes, he had no doubt. But this wasn't just some natural disaster to be averted. This wasn't even a lone alien attack to be thwarted. This was a coordinated, concentrated effort by a group of beings capable of time travel, more or less, and determined to ensure history came to pass just as they intended. The resulting struggle could last, from the perspective of those fighting it, forever, with both sides constantly changing time in a strategic battle waged in the shadows. Indeed, as much as the Doctor hated to admit it, they had the advantage in the situation. He couldn't risk crossing his own timeline too much, knowing the disaster that such a paradox would bring. But the future Starfleet had dozens, if not hundreds of time agents, all ready to go back and contribute to the destruction of the colony in a variety of exciting ways. It didn't matter how good you were at chess, if the other player got to move 5 pieces every time you moved 1. And this wasn't an enemy that he could simply cast out and destroy. These were humans, the future of mankind, and as much as he found their practices despicable, he could also see very grudgingly where they came from. They would kill him if they had to end this. He didn't think he'd be able to do the same to them. So it didn't matter how many times he saved that colony. The Starfleet of the future would just destroy it again. Sighing softly, the Doctor ran his hands through his face, drawing in a shuddering breath as he all but forced himself to let go of his piqued temper, his hurt pride, because he had to admit some of his ire was because they interfered with the Doctor's actions, something he never really enjoyed. Instead, he turned his attention to what, if anything, had troubled him even more than the fate of the colony: the fate of the other doctor. A perusal of the files he had borrowed from the Relativity's computers confirmed as much as what Duquesne had said. These agents were devoted to rather a flattering amount of research in tracking him, well, the other him down, traveling to points in time where the mysterious doctor had been said to make an appearance. But every attempt had been a failure, with the catastrophe in question either being averted by some other means, or in some cases, the catastrophe simply never happening. So many incidents that on the Enterprise D's computer may have been claimed as fact by 29th century have been debunked. Indeed, a poor bloke named Gary Seven from the late 1960s had been accosted by these wankers for this very reason, which would have made it the second time he had clashed with humanity's future. He had apparently hospitalized 2 time agents before everything was settled. Perhaps one could explain the lack of the solid doctor encounters, as time had been rewritten at some point. These disasters erased by a madman in a box. But if that were the case, why did reports of them persist? If they were just simply stories came out of nowhere. The doctor did notice, however, that at the time of his meeting with the Relativity, there was still over 100 rumored incidents still unexplored. Head tilting, he started to scroll through them, stopping about halfway at one particular incident leaped out at him. Hello there, gorgeous, he muttered, licking his lips as he found a rather tasty-looking historical morsel. A police report. The testimony of some man deemed drug-addled by the authorities. The man's testimony spoke of lizard people, ray guns, a mysterious item that may well be a doomsday device, killing all humans on the planet. Definitely sounded like something the doctor would be interested in. In fact, it almost sounded a little like the Silurians, which would have made this only a reference had a little bit more, which would he found only the reference to the reptilian pre-human inhabitants of Earth for this matter. It was a slim thread, granted, but maybe the report had interested the other doctor as well, because apparently someone came, saved the planet with advanced technology, and promptly vanished without another word. A pair, actually. A man and a woman. Grinning with the delight, the doctor keyed in a set of time-space coordinates and spurred the TARDIS into motion, the time rotor beginning to increase in speed as it careened through the vortex. When he stepped out into the crisp air of nighttime Detroit at the beginning of the 21st century, the doctor gave a reflexive cough. After having spent the last little time while on an utterly clean, hygienic spaceships, the taste of air pollution was both uncomfortable yet welcomingly familiar. The streets were all but deserted at this time of night, populated by aging, silent warehouses, crumbling apartment complexes, and as he adjusted his bow tie, he couldn't help but feel a little smile across his face. "Ah, much better," the doctor muttered, tugging at his jacket and glancing at his watch to confirm the time. "At least this 21st century doesn't look too different from mine. Now, where's that warehouse?" He had left a couple of hours worth of leeway to investigate the supposed incident, considering he wasn't certain that he was looking for in the first place. He parked the TARDIS about a block and a half from the location that the police had nabbed their eventual confessor, some drug-abusing bloke named Loomis. From what the police had reported said, this man kidnapped several people and strapped them to tables in an abandoned warehouse, apparently at the behest of these aliens. He had been found unconscious in the stolen car the morning after, and had been promptly charged with a really impressive list of crimes. After anyways, first step was to track down where he needed to be, assuming this wasn't just some addict's fever dream. Turning in a quick circle, the doctor's sonic screwdriver buzzed as he ran a quick scan for any nearby non-terrestrial technology, giving a satisfied hum when he studied the results. Much to his delight, there had been several readings indicating non-terrestrial technology in the very same warehouse this druggie was destined to be found in. "There we are," the doctor muttered, satisfaction written all over his face as he set off at a brisk pace, pausing occasionally to scan again. The readings were concentrated in one warehouse in particular. As he drew closer, the doctor began to pick up other life signs, several of them human, and 3 decidedly not. There were several entrances, most of them boarded up. A small device affixed to the doorway of one of the entrances that hadn't been. It was clearly a scanner that would alert the occupants if anyone entered. A quick buzz of his screwdriver disrupted it long enough to allow him to enter undetected, which at this point the doctor decided it was time to prioritize. As he was curious as to he was to meet these aliens, he had to make sure these humans weren't in any immediate danger. He found the humans soon enough, over half a dozen of them lying unconscious in a single room with IVs strapped to their arms. Moving quietly, the doctor paused long enough to scan the area. The alien life forms were close, but not too close. Before he moved to the nearest human, a young woman. Checking her pulse with 2 fingers, he pried open her eyes, peering into her sightless gaze for a moment, and then passed his screwdriver over her, frowning as he examined the readings. "Let's give you a checkup." The doctor frowned a little before giving a satisfied grump, idly patting her arm as he spoke, quietly, quite pointless in her unconscious form. Sedated, nothing serious. You'll be fine when you wake up. But what are you doing here in the first place? At the sound of an approaching footstep in the air, the Time Lord's eyes widened, head swiveling from one side and then to the other as he looked for somewhere to hide. In the end, he settled for pressing himself into a shadowy nook under a metal stairwell, crouching behind a small stack of boxes, holding his breath. Footsteps, big, heavy footsteps, and then a faint sound of the door swinging open. Though the Time Lord was very, very tempted to peek out and see what was happening, he decided for once to show an element of patience, ears strained to catch any possible details. As it turned out, whoever was out there, they didn't give much consideration for secrecy, as one spoke gruffly, 15 milliliters from the new arrival. Some more sounds, shifting, rustling. Then the footsteps receded, back to the exit. As soon as he heard the doors swing open and shut, the Time Lord was on the move, slipping out from cover. At first his eyes were locked on the door, but as he started to cross the room, a flicker of movement caught his eye, its head whipping towards the source. "Strange," he muttered, frowning. He thought one of the humans, a male, had moved. Then when he glanced over, the man still lay there, eyes unconscious. The doctor's eyes flickered for a moment at the door and then to the human. And though he considered subjecting the man to a scan as well, he realized he had more pressing concerns, such as the mysterious aliens and their equally mysterious agenda. Could they be Silurians? Was another doctor about to arrive and save the day? Moving quickly, the doctor stepped out into the hall. Faint voices to the left had him move towards the source. Keeping a low crouch, sonic screwdriver out, he was perhaps halfway there when he suddenly heard footsteps closing in from behind. Whirling around, the doctor pointed his sonic forward, head leaned back as he realized he was staring quite the down of a barrel of a silver weapon of some kind. It was the human male, who was decidedly not sedated, and pointing some extremely non-terrestrial-looking technology back at him. Well, perhaps not non-terrestrial, but certainly nothing from this time period. As the doctor's eyes fitted from the weapon to the man's face, he realized something odd. The human didn't have the confused, twitchy expression of a man who had just woken up with no knowledge of where he was. On the contrary, the doctor suspected this human knew exactly what he was doing here. "Hold it right there," the human growled, keeping his curious silver weapon pointed as he squinted at the decidedly non-human screwdriver pointing in the Time Lord's grip. "Who are you? Did Daniels send you? Are you working with the Zindi?" "Daniels?" the doctor echoed, keeping his voice down but not lowering his sonic, though he was entirely certain what he had intended to do with it. The weapon in the man's hands didn't look compact or advanced enough that the relativity security force. In fact, it looked quite bulkier than those of Kirk's Enterprise. "Don't know any Dandos. Zindi? What the bloody hell's a Zindi?" The human paused at that, dark eyes narrowing a little as the weapon wavered just for a moment. The two began to circle each other, hands raised until they each had their back to the corridor wall, feeling marginally more secure. "You've never heard of the Zindi?" The human echoed, look sounding more incredulous. "No," the doctor snapped. He was starting to get seriously tired of people pointing guns at him. "I only got as far as W in the anthropological database, only a couple of days to poke through, so I ask you again, what is a Zin?" There was a high-pitched whine that filled the air as a bright energy bolt passed between the two men, striking the far wall with an explosion of sparks. The doctor and the human both dove in opposite directions, taking cover behind two sets of heavy crates before peering around the corner warily. Another blinding flash of light scurried them back behind their various points of cover, but in the brief view, the Time Lord caught a glimpse of reptilian creatures moving across the room. Pressing himself against the crates, the doctor drew a breath, eyes rolling a little as he called to the human. I take it those are Cindy. Yeah, that's a pretty safe bet, the human snapped, peering around the corner and firing a blast from his phase pistol. Look, if Daniels didn't send you to help, then what the hell are you doing here? Who sent you? Whose side are you on? Now? The doctor exclaimed, ducking further behind the wall as another energy blast sent off a fresh shower of sparks. You want to interrogate me now? Well, it now seems like as good a time as any, the human bellowed, firing another quick pair of shots back across the complex. I've got enough enemies to deal with as is, without turning my back on another. Well, here's a thought, the doctor bellowed. The ones trying to shoot you, definitely the enemies. Let's just give everyone who isn't shooting at you the benefit of the I'll sort this. With that, the doctor all but vaunted over the cover as he made him for himself, stalked down the hall grimly. As the Zindi popped out, weapons raised, the doctor lifted his sonic screwdriver and emitted a sharp, high-pitched buzz, causing the alien weapon to explode in a shower of sparks. Cursing, the reptilian dropped his weapon and tried to fall back, only to get drilled by a fatal blast from the human's weapon. A second and third alien were already in retreat, and as the doctor's arm snapped at, the second weapon was disabled, but they vanished from sight a moment later. Dropping to one knee beside the fallen reptilian, the doctor passed a quick wave over him. A glance at the readout elicited a sigh from him. Not Silurian, clearly, and worse off, dead. The human, meanwhile, had sprinted past the hall down from him, and it was with several irritated mutterings from the doctor took off in pursuit. It came to a wide room, on the far side, which flanked with several makeshift lights, and at the center was a piece of decidedly looking non-terrestrial technology. A nearby door hung ajar. The human examined the weapon for a brief moment, and then began to look increasingly agitated when he couldn't find what he wanted. You let them get away, the human snapped, hauling the device up and flipping it open with a chirp. T'Pol, they're heading out the west door. They've got the virus. We're not all so quite as gung-ho about murder, the doctor snapped, scowling as he gave the large alien machine a cursory examination. I've seen enough of those weapons that you've got there to know there's a stun setting. Ever considered using it? You don't get it, shoving the Time Lord not so gently aside. The human was going through the door, calling back as he ran down the corridor. The biotoxin they're carrying is enough to wipe out half the population of Earth. Rack was one of the finest warriors the reptilians had to offer, a brilliant tactician, as well as among the most physically powerful. It was for this reason that he had been chosen for their most crucial of missions, and he was well aware of its success could very well secure the safety of their entire people. So it was hardly a surprise when the sudden turn of events for the intrusion of a human and a simian creature in a bow tie that smelled nothing like a proper human had him already thinking of alternatives. His comrade Rourke he quickly sprinted down the dank hallway, seeking freedom, or at least enough breathing room to have a proper place for an ambush. But as it turned out, they were the ones to be ambushed, for as they burst out of the hall into the alleyway, a car parked nearby gave a sudden honk, a woman's voice rising in protest. Starling, Rourke fired his weapon, but though neither could see the dark interior well enough if they scored a hit, the return fire suggested it hadn't been enough. Rourke fell under the assault, leaving only the unarmed Rack to carry on the mission. But as the reptilian burst into motion, sprinting down the street and expecting to be shot at any moment, he heard the sounds of struggling coming from inside the car. Perhaps their human collaborator had been captured and was even now slowly trying to slow their pursuers down. Such service would earn him a slightly quicker death, at least. It took some thinking and quicker feet, but the Zindi managed to shake his pursuers, for a moment at least. Climbing up to the rooftop, panting for breath, the reptilian finally took cover behind an air conditioning duct, clutching the canister of biotoxin in his chest. The weapon had been disabled by the strange humanoid, and he had none to spare. His battle prowess aside, he knew he stood no chance against his pursuers and their considerable technology. But he still had the temporal beacon. his only means back to his time period, and the virus, while not entirely complete, could still land a devastating blow to the simian human scum. Perhaps it would even be better to take his winnings and leave, as it were. Setting the canister down for a moment, Rack tugged the beacon at his belt and began to fiddle with it, seeking extraction quickly before the humans. A low whirl filled the air, and the beacon suddenly erupted into a shower of sparks. Snarling, Rack instinctively dropped the device and whirled around in a complete circle. He didn't see anybody, at least not until a low whistle caused him to glance up to atop a nearby alcove that housed access to the building's stairwell. On top of it, which the strange-smelling human sat, waving his hand slightly. "Sorry," the odd man chirped. That just seemed really important, so I thought better break it." His hands plopped down behind his back, a long metal canister held between them. It wasn't until Rock looked down at his feet when he realized the stranger had stolen the virus while his back was turned. "For that matter, I'm guessing you don't want this smashed either. Not yet, anyway. So I'd be nice and quiet if you want to survive." With a quick growl, the Zindi lunged, starting to climb up the alcove in pursuit. "Oh, wait, you'd want to break it." The doctor's other hand snapped, the screwdriver coming to life and then raising to an abrupt squeal. For Rack, it was only pure pain. Pure, blinding pain at the sound seeming to cut through his mind and sending every sense into a cacophony of agony. Clutching both sides of his head, the Zindi staggered and dropped to one knee, drawing a breath, but refusing to voice his discomfort with so much as a grunt. "Sorry," the doctor shouted, to be heard over the sound, wincing as he hopped off the stairwell, keeping the wand raised as he drew closer. "I know it's uncomfortable, but you're not giving me much of a choice here. Why don't you just..." Rack was a bat warrior without equal, bred and trained for battle. Though the pain was overwhelming, the reptilian marshaled his inner reserves of strength and then, with a savage roar, lunged forward all at once, a scaled hand lashing out into a backhand. The silvery wand was knocked clear of the doctor's hand, scuttering across the rooftop, even as the reptilian's other hand lashed out, grabbing the scrawny man by the throat. The sonic squeal died the moment the stranger was disarmed, and it was the growl of pleasure that the Zindi lifted with just a single arm, hauling the doctor into the air until his toes dangled above the ground. "Wait!" the Time Lord croaked, both hands clutching at the arm that was choking him. "Don't you want to discuss this for a moment?" A sudden arc of phaser fire came out of nowhere, catching the reptilian square in between the shoulder blades. Arms flying out wide, the Zindi staggered, groaned, and toppled forward, breathing rattling in his chest. With the very last thing he saw was the mysterious man in the bow tie, scolding his killers. "Are you all right?" the human male asked as he jogged over with a stern-looking woman in tow. But the doctor was too busy feeling righteous to notice. "I have the situation perfectly in control," the Time Lord snapped at the new arrivals as he rubbed his neck gingerly, catching them a little bit both off guard, and making them very uncomfortable, as one of the arms he was waving had the silver container that potentially civilization-ending biotoxin clutched in it. "And for the second time, have you lot ever considered using the sorting sun function?" "What?" The human's eyes flickered nervously to the container in the doctor's arm. "Stun doesn't work on them. We've tried before, they just shrug it off." "Oh." They seemed to mollify the doctor at least a little bit, but he still straightened up a bit, voice stern. "Well, you need to find a better stun setting in the future. Thank you for stopping the choking." "Anytime." Inching forward a little, the human's eyes drifted to the container. "I don't suppose you could put that down." The odd man glanced at the container, then waved his hand distractedly. "Oh, this is the virus you mentioned, then? Oh, don't fret. They didn't remove the container. This is just the external shielding. Durasteel containment pod, remarkably tough. I could throw this off a building and the interior contents would be fine, not a scratch on them." "Not that I'm going to, mind you," the doctor added hastily, as his assurance was only seemed to alarm the pair considerably, causing them to take a half step closer with weapons raised. So be much obliged if you just lower the weapons and please stop looking like you're wanting to tackle me around the knees. You want the container? Here. You can hold it if it makes you feel better." The male all but snatched the virus pod away when it was offered, grimacing a little as he handed it to the woman. "There, all the better," the Time Lord beamed. "So who are you lot? Not those buggers from the Relativity, are you?" The human looked, if anything, more confused. I'm Jonathan Archer. And this is to Paul. Right, the one you warned about the Zindi. The doctor paused, blinking at the woman. Her hair was done a remarkable job in hiding those pointy ears. So much so that he hadn't even realized that she wasn't human. To Paul, Vulcan name that. Ah, Vulcan! Yes, love Vulcans. Extremely bright bunch, terrible comedians, but quick as a collection of whips to get tied together to make some sort of super whip. Especially when have Vulcans been capable of time travel? The woman's eyes flickered as she replied, "We, that is to say, I." "What she means to say," Archer replied, deadpanned, extending a hand in a solemn gesture showing his surroundings, "is that the Vulcan Science Directorate has deemed that time travel impossible." "Oh, well, all right," the doctor amended. "They'll eventually become a bright bunch, but seriously, impossible? That would have put you lot at least 22nd century. Oh, hell! Jonathan Archer?" Something about the names combined with the time period had triggered a recollection of his studies of Starfleet history. Archer's eyes flickered towards Paul before looking back at the doctor. Yes. After a long, disbelieving pause, the doctor's arm sprang as he turned around, marching off in the other direction and rambling as he started to climb off the roof. The other pair forgotten. "I can't bloody well swing my arms without hitting captains of the Enterprise. Enterprise this, Enterprise that. Not like there's any other 1,000 ships in the starting Starfleet over the 200 stretch to Picard. Why didn't they ever stumble on anything remotely interesting in their journeys? Or were they all populated by the laziest layabouts the human race could squeeze into a bloody uniform for?" Considering they had the virus and the strange man didn't exactly seem like a world-ending threat, Archer wasn't exactly certain what to do about him, or rather if he should even try to stop the man from leaving. As the doctor vanished down the fire escape, however, the captain signed and tossed the small box to Paul. "Tag everything for retrieval," he instructed. "I'm just going to see what our new friend is up to." Breaking into a jog, Archer reached the edge of the roof just in time to see the doctor reach the sidewalk, when he immediately began marching away, still waving his arms, still ranting about something or other. Quickly, the human began to take the 3 steps at a time, nearly losing his balance more than once as he sought to catch up with the meandering man. Reaching the streets a minute later, he took off in a full sprint. As he neared the street corner, he could hear the most peculiar grinding noise. But it wasn't until he rounded the corner that he saw the source. It was a police box. It was a disappearing police box. Even for someone who just saved the Earth, past and present, from reptilian aliens thanks to the help of enigmatic 31st century time travelers and a rambling madman in a bow tie, this was just a little too weird. So bereft of alternatives, Archer just said the only thing that seemed to fit. "Huh. Well, that was disappointing," the doctor muttered, even as he hopped through the TARDIS console controls, sighing softly as he tugged at one of the monitors over. "I come looking for a doctor identifying a captain. Again, what are the odds that I just happened to end up colliding with another bloody Enterprise bunch? This pair seems to be grumpier than the rest, at that, which is saying something considering the permanent frown on Commander Spock's face." More troubling, however, was Archer's reference to Daniels. Presumably this fellow was responsible for sending the pair to them and back in time, which meant it was probably the same faction that had been so determined to slap a leash on the doctor. Setting a quick course through the dawn of Earth history, figured it would be a good place any to hide from until he can make his next move, the doctor turned his attention back to the monitor, fingerings drumming on his console as he skimmed through files. Nothing really leapt out at him, however, and after a few frustrating minutes, he slammed a hand back down on the monitor and started to pace. "Damn it! All right, think, Doctor, think. There's a reasonably be perfectly sane explanation for this." Lips curled up as he tried to fend off what he realized was a rising sense of panic. "Oh, come on. There's nobody named the Doctor here. That Gary 7 lad, his servos were loaded with loads like his servo was loads like a screwdriver. No, he wasn't a time traveler, unless he was lying. But he registered as human. Chameleon Arch? Ridiculous. Think!" Then he froze in place, a little nugget of information tugging at him. "All right," the doctor muttered, cracking his fingers and giving him a quick wiggle as he peered at the monitor. "Different tact, then. Alright, don't look for mysteries that haven't been solved. Look for mysteries that were solved with a different answer. Speaking of Archer, where? Ah! Time ship. Ah, advanced technology. Bigger on the inside than the. Ah, gotcha! Filling with a new energy and new determination, the doctor quickly entered a new set of coordinates as he muttered, Suppose I'm doomed to deal with every Enterprise. And that's it for now. Yep. Somehow, Jonathan Archer managed to escape a beating, which is saying something considering how much he gets beatings. But the Doctor had an encounter with the NX1 crew, and now he is going after the time ship, meaning that he will probably encounter our old friend Daniels from the 31st century. How's that going to play out? Well, then you're just going to have to subscribe and find out, because that's the last chapter for tonight. And you have to tune in next week as we explore more of a captain and a madman on Fanfiction Fridays. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to see more, you already know what to do. Make sure you help Debbie get some food in his belly, even though he's looking kind of slim in the waist. And he gives you a nice thumbs up. I want to thank everyone who came out and watched me blow my voice out and do some very bad impressions, even though you guys might enjoy it. So, until then, this has been Shin Tiger Curl, that dude in the straw hat, saying goodnight, and see you next week for another episode of Fanfiction Fridays.